Thank you. I want to thank Doug Parks for providing this opportunity for me to speak here before you, and I want to thank you for coming out because I have some very, very exciting information that I love to share with everybody, and this information really relates to what controls biology. And as Doug mentioned, I was a cellular biologist at the University of Wisconsin cloning human muscle cells. I was taking cells out of people, putting them into the tissue culture dish, and studying individual cells in an effort to understand what was controlling their fate, what was making them dystrophic or pathological, what was making them normal, and in the control process. In this research, I started to come to an understanding that greatly differed from my whole scientific foundation, that we were controlled by genes. And in the end, the research let me in on the inside that it was the perception of the environment that controlled the cell. Well, in cell levels, perceptions are perceptions, but at human levels, perceptions are beliefs. And it turns out that it's actually our beliefs that select our genes and select our behavior. And the beautiful part about this, as Doug said, is it's life-changing for myself especially. I was one of the genetic kind of people, and now I've transitioned my whole life into this so-called New Age spiritual science of belief. And the wonderful part about this lecture, outside of the fact that I will provide you with a molecular connection of how a belief actually switches on a gene so that there's no like empty boxes, no devotion in this place. This is actually just molecules. I'm going to get that across, I hope. But the beautiful part about this is that in the second part of the presentation, a dear friend and colleague of mine, Rob Williams, is going to provide you with information and tools about how you can rapidly change beliefs. Belief changing is not that hard a process. In fact, it can be done almost in minutes. So there's new science and new tools available. But before I start, let's start off with a truth statement. This is a very simple truth statement. Knowledge is power. The more awareness you have, the more capable you are of surviving and succeeding. Well, this is a truth, but there's another truth as well that goes with this picture, and that is lack of knowledge results in a lack of power. Why is this relevant right now? This question about lack of knowledge is that we all have been provided with information about our health being involved with our genes. We used to hear the stories. Actually, we still hear it on a daily newspaper. You might even find an article tonight that talks about the fact that the genes control the aspects of our lives. Well, we also recognize this, that we got the genes from our parents. And when you get genes from your parents and all of a sudden the genes control your life, then you find yourself to be more or less a victim of your heredity. If you find that there's cancer running in your family, then what do you start to get nervous about? My God, I've got genes in here. I'm a ticking time bomb. Something is going to go off and I'm going to end up dead, or some problem is going to happen. Why? Not my responsibility. Came from my parents. Well, the problem with that belief system is it extends to another level. It says if you really can't do anything about your genes because that's what you receive from your parents, then all of a sudden you become irresponsible in the sense of like, well, I can't do anything about it, so why should I even try? And that's when all of a sudden all things go lost. And this is where this lack of power manifests itself, because this belief about genes is totally disempowering to every one of us, because it says you are less powerful than your genes. But what about the reality that this is not a true statement? And the fact is, well, let me explain what I'm talking about here. I'll start off with this. This picture of the DNA, almost everyone has seen this. It's been in school for so many years now. We're all trained with this. We see this on the media every day, that the DNA in your body, the genes in your body, provide for the characteristics of your life. So things not just besides your height, your hair color, your eye color, but things like anxiety and obesity and homosexuality and aggression and shyness and happiness are all characteristics that have been attributed to genes. And if this is true, then the belief system, of course, is that when you got these genes at the moment of fertilization, your life was already established, and all the rest of your life is just the unfoldment of the programs that you received from your parents. So the genes, and we're going to talk some science tonight, but it's not going to be that difficult, so bear with me on it, because, again, I don't want to leave black boxes in here, empty spaces where you have to have devotion. I'm going to show you the connection. The genes, the DNA molecules, are found in the cell, in the individual cell, in a structure called the nucleus. So almost all people have seen a cell with a nucleus in it. And virtually all the genes are in the nucleus. As it says right here in this paper, which is in a recent issue of Science, this is one of the most prestigious journals in the world today, it says here in the first sentence on this article, which was dealing with the whole issue dedicated to the role of the nucleus, first sentence, the nucleus is the command center of the cell. This is conventional belief, that the nucleus is the command center because in the nucleus are the genes, and the genes control you, so the nucleus represents that source of control for the cell. Well, the command center of the cell would be tantamount to the brain. As I used to teach in medical school to the medical students, the cells, and this is an image of a cell, just a cartoon image of a cell. The cells make us up. We have approximately 50 to 75 trillion cells that make our body. Interesting point I used to teach them is this. There is no new function in your entire human body that's not already present in every cell. Every cell has a respiratory system, a digestive system, an excretory system, an endocrine system, an integumentary system, a nervous system, a reproductive system, an immune system. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you is this, that the cell and the human are structural functional counterparts of each other. Whatever's in the cell is in the human. Whatever's in the human is in the cell. So when I talk about the brain of the cell, the brain of the human, as that element that controls the command center of the human body, when I come over here and just read what we just read off the science journal that said the nucleus is the command center of the cell, this is because all the DNA is in here, then we get the assumption that the nucleus is the brain of the cell, which is what you anticipate if it's the command center. Well, that's an interesting concept for this reason. I'll ask you a simple question, and the question is this. If I take the brain out of any living organism, what is the immediate and necessary consequence of that action? Death. Absolutely. It's going to die. So what happens if I go to the cell and take the nucleus out of the cell? Well, if the nucleus is the brain of the cell, by definition, the cell's going to die. Here's the reality. I remove the brain from any organism and the organism dies. But if I go to the nucleus and remove the nucleus from the cell is totally unaffected by it. A cell can live for 2 or more months with no genes in it at all. And it's not just sitting there. It's doing everything it was doing before we took the nucleus out. It's moving around. It's communicating with other cells. It's eating. It's growing. It's able to eliminate waste and build up its structure. It recognizes toxins and moves away from them. Recognizes food, moves toward that. Basically, what am I telling you? I take all the genes out of the cell and I alter the behavior in no way. Meaning this, by definition, the nucleus cannot be the controlling center of the cell because the cell still has control with no nucleus. Well, wait, I took all the genes out and the cell still has behavior. The bottom line is that the genes do not control biology. This is a mistake. This is an assumption. It was made years and years ago. It was never proven scientifically, but it just seemed so correct that we bought the story. And in fact, the cosmic joke just hit us not very long ago with the outcome of the Human Genome Project. Why was it a joke? And I'll tell you this. If the mechanism worked according to the way it's written in the textbooks, that the genes control biology, then there's the requirement that there has to be at least 120,000 genes to make a human. When the Human Genome Project's results were turned in, it turned out that there were only less than 35,000 genes. Over 90,000 genes are not present, which means this. It's not that the genes are absent. Our belief system was wrong. The genes do not control biology like we thought. So the Human Genome Project really pulls the rug out because they thought they were going to get the blueprint of how to make a human with all of these genes. And it turns out there are not that many genes. 2/3 of the genes are missing. Meaning we have to now understand a new way of looking at biology. Interestingly enough, though, the new understanding actually started to come out in the last 10 years. So everything I'm going to talk to you about tonight is science within the last 10 years. And the interesting part about it is this. It takes at least 10 or 15 years for science to take a fact from its first inception to get it out into the public so that the people can understand it. So anything in a textbook, for example, is at least 10 or 15 years old. So what you're going to hear tonight is the future textbook. You're going to know the science that has just been released in the last 10 years. And I'm going to talk about this amazing structure, the human cell, and how it works. And I also told you that the cell and you have the same functions. Where you have an organ in your body, the cell has organelles that carry out the same function. So that this is a respiratory and digestive system. These are all structures in the cell. And the issue is, what we really want to find out is, where's the brain of the cell? Because up to just a few minutes ago, the conventional belief is the brain of the cell of the genes. But if I take all the genes out and the brain is still functioning, we have to look for an alternative understanding of how the cell works. So I'm going to start off and give you some very basic insight into the mechanism of how cells work, okay? And cells are very interesting. They're like machines. This is an example of a transmission out of my car. And what you can see, it's called an exploded diagram, because you can see all these intricate little parts that all come together and assemble together to make a functional car transmission. Well, the point about it is this. The cell is analogous to this for the following reason. The cell is actually a machine made out of parts, but the parts are proteins, not metal parts and gears like this. The cells are made out of protein parts. There's approximately 70,000 protein parts. So when you open up a cell and you start to take it out, you can start to find that the building blocks are proteins. This becomes very important because what I want you to understand is when you look in the mirror and see yourself, when you say, brown hair, blue eyes, such a height, all of that is due to the protein. The protein provides you with your structure. And so the assembly of these parts. And the interesting thing about these machine parts is this. I can do a lot of the functions in a test tube. I can do digestion in a test tube. All I have to do is take the right enzymes, the proteins for digestion, put it in a test tube, it'll do digestion. I can do muscle contraction. I can take the actin and myosin, which are the contractile proteins, put them in a test tube and make them contract in front of your eyes. I can do respiration in a test tube. What I'm saying again, the cell is a machine. It's made out of parts. The parts interact with each other to create the complex thing we call life. Well, let's talk about the parts. As I said, there were 70 to 90,000 different protein parts that make up the human. Now here's the interesting understanding about these parts. Of all the proteins, all of them are linear strings, just like this beaded string. Every protein is a beaded string. The beads or the subunits, the little beads, are called amino acids. So when you go to the health food store and you're talking about buying amino acids, what are you buying? You're buying the little building blocks to make the protein. So what makes the difference between 70 to 90,000 different proteins? And the answer is this. First, they're all strings, as I said, so that's already a commonality. What's the difference? Two things. The length of the chain, how many amino acids are in the string, is variable from one protein to the next. And number two, and most importantly, the sequence of the colors which represent the different amino acids are making the characteristic of the protein. Now, it's hard for you to see how you get structure out of something that looks like a string of beads. So instead of beads, I'm going to use these as representatives of beads. These are little pipe fittings. I have three different, actually, shapes of pipe fittings. A 45-degree angle pipe fitting, a 90-degree angle pipe fitting, and a straight one. So three variations, and consider there are 20 different variations. I'm only showing you three. So here's the point. If I start to assemble these pipe fittings in a sequence, what you can start to see is I am creating a linear chain, but now it's not so flexible and floppy. It actually has a rigid backbone kind of structure to it. So as I start to assemble this, you can see I can create a structure, okay? But here's what I told you. What did I tell you about what was making the difference between the proteins? The sequence and the length of the chain. So look, what if I take this apart and reassemble the sequence of amino acids in a different sequence? You think I'm going to get the same shape? So let's take it apart and we'll take a look at it and see what happens. So the point about it is this. You assemble the amino acids, you put them in a sequence, and the sequence determines what's going to happen. So I take the same amino acids, plug them in now in a sequence, but a different sequence than just we had a second ago. And as I do this, you can see the shape of this protein is not the same as it was the first time. Is that evident? Can you see that? I want everybody to understand it. Why is this important? What's the point? The parts of the proteins have structure due to the sequence of these amino acids. Okay? Number two, how can I get 70,000 different parts? And the answer is this. By creating a chain with a different sequence of amino acids for each different protein. So you saw that, right? So now the bottom line is this. I have this particular protein. And if I just made a body out of protein only, and that's all it was, then I would be a statue. Instead of made out of brass or bronze, I'd be a statue made out of organic building blocks called a protein. There's no life. Where does the life come from? That is the most important, exciting question. I made a machine out of protein, but what is life? Life is animation. Life is movement. And so therefore, where's the movement come from? Now I'm going to show you that. And it's simple because this is the ultimate understanding of where life comes from. When I assembled these together, I connected them like poppet beads, but look, they twist because at the junction, they're not locked, so I can change the shape of this protein. I just made this one. Okay? Now I'm going to show you something. Let me show you two different shapes. And before I do that, I'm going to give you a little piece of information. The yellow ones at the end are going to be negatively charged. Both of them are negative. Why is this important? We'll go back to a very basic principle of science. When two like charges come against each other, what do? They repel each other. And two opposite charges, what do? Attract. So I'm going to show you two different shapes of the same protein by just twisting it. And I'm going to ask you to tell me which is the more stable of the two. Okay? Let's use this as shape 1. Okay? Now I'm going to show you shape 2, and then I want you to tell me which is more stable, shape 1 or shape 2. Shape 2. And the reason why? Because the two negative charges repel each other. They want to get as far away from each other as they can. So does this make sense that this is a stable shape for this protein? Okay, cool. Now, I have this protein in your body, and I said that this was negative at the end. And this is an environmental signal, and I'm going to talk about environmental signals. Signals are either other molecules or atoms or energy. Energy can be signals as well. But in this case, let's say it's a molecule. Let's say it's estrogen, a hormone. And let's just say that it's very positively charged. What's the charge on here? A negative? Okay, so if this is coming along and this is positive, what happens when two opposite charges come near each other? So all of a sudden you're going to find that there's a binding. This is where the estrogen binds to the protein. Now this is more positive than this negative. So the question is this. What's the charge at this end of the molecule now? Positive. What's the charge at this one? Now the question is very simple. Is this shape of the molecule stable or is this one more stable? This is so fundamental. I want you to understand how critical this is. You understood that there was a shape that if I have this molecule on, let's say I take this molecule off, what's the shape going to do? It's going to open back up like this, right? And then if I put the molecule back on, what's the shape going to do? Close. Well, you just told me there were two shapes that were stable, and the difference is when I add this signal, I go from one shape to the other. Does that make sense? Well, that is where life comes from. Life is movement of the proteins. The proteins move, and when they change shape, they can do jobs. So if I have work, I can have this thing do a job. By opening and closing, that would be its job. So you can say, well, what kind of jobs are just like simple movements? I'll give you a simple one. Let's say I'm a protein, and that this is the signal molecule, and I stand like this, and when the signal molecule hits in my hand, I go like that, and I let go of the signal. What happens if I let go of the signal? What's going to happen? I'm going to go back. And then another signal comes in my hand. Then what am I going to do? Go like this. And you say, well, that's a nice simple movement, but what does that have to do with it? Well, if your house is on fire, and you have a bucket brigade, and I'm a protein in the middle, and somebody hands me the bucket, what am I going to do? Pick it from here and pass it to the other guy. Well, the point about it is very simply this. Proteins provide for my physical structure, but proteins can change shape when a signal binds to that protein. So all of a sudden it says that a static protein could just be sitting here, but the moment the signal shows up, the protein does something. Well, that something is hooked or actually used to do a job in the cell. So what is digestion? Here's an enzyme. It stands here. Here's the food molecule, and it gets caught in my hand, and I bring it together, and I rip it apart. That's all it is. Ripping apart. Digestion. So the bottom line is this. You're a machine. The structure of the machine is due to the protein parts. The proteins are all these linear chains made out of amino acids. That the final structure is due to the sequence of the amino acids and the charge. That's this critical part. When I balance the charge, the protein is stable. If I change the charge, the protein changes its shape. It's simple, but it's very basic science, okay? And here's the point about it is this, is that and this is interesting because this is right out of the Science Journal, and this backbone here, this protein in green, is the same one that's in yellow. And in this case, this is a protein that causes muscle contraction in your body. And it depends on this signal. The signal is calcium. When calcium shows up, it plugs into the hole. It changes the charge, and it causes the protein to change its shape from this inactive form, conformation 1, shape 1, When I add the signal, it goes to shape 2, the active form. If I take the signal away, then the protein goes back to the resting state. So there are two different shapes to the protein, an active and an inactive form, and the activity is now controlled by the signal. So basically it says that proteins provide for your physical structure, but proteins also provide for your behavior. Your behavior is the movement, the actions that you express in your life, and the movement comes from the movement of protein. So basically it says this: your behavior represents the action of a protein that interacts with a signal. And so that the signal activates the protein to move, and the movement generates behavior. Well, why this is important then, it says this: if I have just the protein and no signal, what happens? Nothing. So then action is really by what? Controlling the signal. So here's the point. The brain of the cell is the structure that controls the signals to tell the cell what to do in response to the environment. So we want to understand the brain of the cell because there's a very limited time, and over the weekend when I have 12 hours or so to talk about it, I can expand on it, but in a very brief moment, the brain of the cell is the skin of the cell, the membrane. It's the same as your skin. And you might say to yourself, what do you mean, the skin and the brain, that they look like two different things? And the answer is this: in embryology, there are germ layers. There are 3 germ layers that create the ultimate full-size organism. The germ layers are called ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. They're layers of cells. Each layer gives rise to different organs and tissues. Interesting, the outer layer, called the ectoderm, only gives rise to 2 things in the human body: skin and the brain and nervous system. Your brain is derived from your skin. And it makes sense as to why, because I'll show you. The skin is the interface between the environment and the cytoplasm. The skin can read what's going on and then tell the proteins in the cell what to do. I told you I could take the nucleus out of the cell and didn't change the behavior. And the reason why is the nucleus is not the brain of the cell. The nucleus is the gonad of the cell. It's reproduction. If I need a part to make the cell work, then the nucleus is like the Butterick pattern drawer. It's got all the patterns to make 70,000 different parts in your body, but the nucleus doesn't know which one is needed at which time. The nucleus has no intelligence. The nucleus is just the repository for the pattern. So if I take the nucleus out of the cell, I didn't change anything about the cell. The cell will die after a while for the following reason: the proteins that make up the machinery break down and wear out. And if they break down, I got to replace them, otherwise I die. So I need the nucleus not for the intelligence, I only need the nucleus for the blueprint. So there's no brain involved with genes. Genes are not capable of that. How does the cell membrane work? It takes an environmental signal, and it could be anything. It could be sunshine. It could be hot air. It could be sound. It could be anything that's out there, chemicals, smells, taste, anything that's from the environment. The membrane picks that up, and the environmental signal is called the primary signal. And then what happens then is this: the membrane converts the environmental signal into the signal that controls the protein, so that the behavior is mediated by the cell membrane as it responds to the environment. The behavior, if I cut off the environment, the cell has no behavior. Your cell with all the components in it, if I could cut off the environment from the cell, it will just sit there. It has no life. Life is due to how the cell responds to the environment. Your life is how you respond to your environment. As you see the environment, as you walk out of here, those are environmental signals. They actually run your proteins and make you behave. So your behavior is not due to the genes. We didn't even bring DNA in yet. Your behavior is due to how you see the signal, which is called perception, and then convert that signal into selecting the right proteins for your responses. Okay? So now the issue is, how does this membrane work? Well, that's the beautiful part. It's relatively simple. Let me explain it. If we look at some cells growing on a petri dish, and we look at the skin of the cells, it's all bubbly looking, but at a higher magnification, this is what it looks like. At higher magnification, the skin is like a sandwich. It looks like a bread and butter sandwich, and there's this lipid layer right in the middle, and it's the oil that makes the skin a barrier, because the water in the environment can't go through the membrane, and the water inside the cell can't go through the membrane. So under the skin, there's a protected environment of which all the mechanisms can work. To show you the reality of it, this is an electron microscope picture of the actual cell membrane. You see the dark light, dark layer of the cell membrane? It really represents the layer of these molecules that look like this, okay? Dark, light, dark, so that the model and the image of the real picture are very much exactly the same thing. But this membrane isn't functional because I left out the most important part of the membrane. It's the proteins that we were talking about that are capable of responding to the signal and then activating a behavior. So when I look at the surface of the cell, actually, instead of being smooth, there are all these structures like antennas sticking up all over the surface and proteins built into the membrane. And that these proteins read the environment and convert that environmental signal into a behavior. Let me explain how it works. Here's the membrane. Here are two different proteins. I'm going to tell you right now, there are thousands and thousands of proteins in the cell membrane, but I can divide them into two groups. One group has antennas on it. And antennas are receivers, just like your television antenna on top of your house before cable. When you had an antenna on the top, what was its function? To pick up a signal. And then what happened to that signal? It was transmitted down the wire to the television, and the television converted the signal into something you could see. Well, here's the point. Many of the receptors in the cell have these antennas sticking up from the cell. So if I go back, these are the antennas sticking up from the surface of the cell right here. And what they're tuned to are not television stations, they're tuned to environmental information. It might be glucose, for example. Is there sugar out there? Or histamine. Is there histamine out there which tells me to get ready for an emergency response? Or is there something like insulin which tells me to change my metabolic pathway? For every different thing the cell can see, it has a different antenna. So that means the cells are covered over the surface with antennas for everything the cell can deal with. So the signals come in and picked up by the antenna, but then they're converted into the behavior by the second class of proteins. There are three different kinds. Channels, which are just like olives with a hole in the middle of it where information can go in. Enzymes, which are proteins that cause metabolism to occur, or cytoskeletal proteins, proteins that change the shape of the cell. So if a signal comes in, let's say a toxic signal comes in, and this is a receiver for that, and it couples to the skeleton, it says, it's toxic signal, turn around and start running the other way, then this is the input and this is the output. So the proteins work in combination. Receptors receive signals. Do you have receptors? Yeah. What are the obvious ones? Eyes, ears, nose, taste, touch. Where are all your receptors located? In the skin. So you and the cell are parallels, but it doesn't look like an eye and it doesn't look like a nose, but its function is exactly the same. It's the equivalent of an eye. If this was tuned to light, a photon of light would hit this antenna and that cell would respond like an eye and say, I see the light. And once it sees the light, it has to convert that information, and it uses it by connecting to this, and I'm going to show you how that happens. So the input, the antenna, connects to the output, which makes the behavior. Let me explain how it works. So we'll use this model right here of a receptor. Let's see. This receptor is going to, I'm going to show it to you in dynamic motion. Here's my membrane, bread and butter sandwich. Here's my antenna, and this is the antenna scouring the environment for a signal. Look at the shape because the protein goes into the cell. Look at the shape. What happens when a protein binds to a signal? Changes shape. Well, watch what happens. See, when the signal came in, and watch what happens when the signal goes away. Should I do that one more time so you can see that? Okay, basically it says this, is that the proteins are in the cell, that these receptors are migrating through the surface of the cell. Okay, here it is. Are you going to come start moving soon? Okay, here's the protein. It's scanning the environment, looking for signals. And let's say it's an insulin receptor. If there's insulin, I would activate the receptor. But look, no activation of the receptor. There's no change in shape. But when the insulin shows up, I change the shape. So if I'm inside the cell, if we were inside the cell and these proteins were hanging down from the ceiling, would you be able to tell if insulin was here or not by the shape of the protein? Yeah. So if you're inside the cell, you can tell what's going on outside. Okay? Now the next thing is this. After I receive a signal, I actually have to send a secondary signal into the cell to activate the behavior of the cell. So in this case, I'm going to use a channel, which is like an olive. And what happens is this. This protein moves around through the membrane. See, it's closed at the top. Nothing can get through. But when it opens, it makes a channel where signal molecules can shoot inside the cell. And the bottom line is this. The only thing that can go through this channel is what fits. If the molecule doesn't fit, it doesn't go through the channel. So basically it says this. In the resting state, the protein is closed. But when activated, the protein opens. And when it opens, it allows signals to go into the cell and coordinate the behavior of the cell. So now that we've looked at that, let's put the two together and then show you what is this mechanism that controls biology. The two together, the input and the output. This is looking for the environmental signal, and this is going to convert that signal into behavior. This is the connector. Look at the shape. Does it fit here, yes or no? Okay, so that means no signal is present. So no behavior. But when the signal shows up, I change the shape. When the shape is changed, then I connect it, open this one up, and see this? This is a signal that tells the cell to do something, and it's going to do whatever's connected to that. So the bottom line is the behavior of the cell is controlled by the input of the environment, and then the conversion of that input into a behavior signal that coordinates the function of the cell to respond to what's going on in the environment. Interesting point. If I cut the antenna off the cell so it cannot see anything, there's no behavior. The cell is totally comatose. It'll sit there, and what does that mean? It says then behavior is related to the signal. If there's no signal, there's no behavior. So it's like reflex, stimulus, response. The signal is the stimulus, and then the cell creates a response. So basically it goes like this. The receptor is the input. It reads the environment. The receptor then connects to the effector, which generates the behavior through a secondary signal. The primary signal, this is the secondary signal that activates the behavior of the cell. So that this unit is controlling a specific aspect of behavior. But there's like thousands of these different kinds of units simultaneously. So this is an example of just a switch. It's a switch. When insulin shows up, switch on metabolism. When histamine shows up, switch on protection. So there's for each different thing that's out in the environment, there's a switch that will activate the behavior of the cell. So basically, did you understand that as a switch, input-output? Well, then look at it this way. The function of the receptor is awareness of the environment, right? It sees. But I have to convert that signal into a biological action. So the function of the output guy, the effector, is to create a physical sensation or response to that signal. Is that understandable so far? Why is this important? Go back and ask, the first step is this. What does this do? What does it do? It controls a typical behavior in response to the signal. Well, what is this called? Well, it represents awareness of the environment through physical sensation. So what is this control unit actually called? Perception. Perception, awareness of the environment through physical sensation. So if I go back a second, I say, what is the function of this? And the answer is this. It's perception. It sees the environment and activates a behavior. There's no DNA involved. There's no genes involved. All we're talking about is stimulus response. Stimulus comes in the receptor, response made by the effector. Okay? So the point about it is this simple first conclusion. It's very basic. Behavior, which is movement, this is behavior. Movement of protein is controlled by the signal, but via perception. So the bottom line is this. Perception controls behavior. If there is no perception, there's no behavior. And all of a sudden it's like, well, that's number one. We didn't have genes involved yet. So let's just see how this actually works. So basically, here are proteins in the cell. Let's say that these proteins carry out a specific function, respiration or digestion. We call it a pathway. So let's say it's a muscle contraction. That these proteins, when activated, what activates the protein? The signal activates the protein. So what we're going to do is convert an environmental signal using the receptor and the effector. And this time I'm using an enzyme. Okay? And what I'm going to show you is how the mechanism from the environment, the signal, well, here's my connector one. Remember the green guy? But now the signal comes, and when the signal from the environment binds to the receptor, it changes the shape or confirmation of the receptor, which implies that the signal is there. So the protein informs the cell that something has happened. Now that that shape has changed, this processor protein, the green one, can bind to the shape because it wasn't able to bind before. It wasn't the right shape. It's like dominoes, one hitting the next. Now that the processor protein is bound to the receptor, it changes its shape and will conform to fit the enzyme. So one domino hits the next, hits the next. Now that this is connected, I activate the enzyme, and the enzyme is going to create a signal. Now here's the connection between my muscle of the proteins and the receptor. This is the secondary signal. Remember, primary signal and secondary signal. Well, at first it's bound and covered up and inhibited because if there's no signal, I don't want it to do anything. But when the signal shows up, then I take the enzyme, split it, and the active component, now this is the active signal, can bind to the protein. And now I can activate this protein. And this is the behavior that's going to be expressed by the cell. And the question, of course, is, well, what really activated this protein? What was the original source? The answer is the primary signal at the environment was then relayed by the secondary signal to activate the behavior of the cell. So without all the labels, if we just quickly look at it, let's just go right through it real fast. And the point about it is this. Let's see. That here's the environmental signal. Here's the receptor, the effector. That's the perception unit. Perception is now being started because it saw the environment, changed the shape, activates the enzyme. The enzyme is activated, breaks that molecule, the signal molecule. The signal molecule comes down, binds to the protein, and generates behavior. The bottom line was this. The behavior of the cell is not programmed. The behavior of the cell is continuously adjusting to whatever the signals are in the environment. So now I got another question to ask you. What happens if that environmental signal shows up, but I don't have the proteins necessary in the cell right now for that event? So when it shows up, it says, oh, I can't make a response. I don't have the behavioral proteins. Where do we get the behavioral proteins? Now we bring the DNA back in. What's the role of the DNA? The DNA double helix actually is a blueprint of the protein. If I separate the helix into two separate strands, and you look at these are called bases, these are the steps of the double helix right here. The color sequence in the DNA codes for the sequence of the amino acids. So for every 3 bases, I can tell you which is the next amino acid. So the point is this. The plan of how to make a protein, a specific protein, is built into this DNA. So that every 3 bases say, oh, put in tryptamine. Okay, put in proline. Next one, put in alanine. Whatever it is. So the sequence, the DNA is a blueprint for the protein. Okay? That's all it is. It doesn't have any action except when I need it. So how do I activate the gene? Well, you heard of cancer genes? And you say, what is that, a gene that gives you cancer? And the answer is, here's a simple truth. Genes do not self-activate. That's biochemically a truth, meaning a gene cannot turn itself on and a gene cannot turn itself off. If you want a gene to be active, it's not up to the gene. So the concept that there's a cancer gene is a false concept, meaning this. If the gene really caused cancer and you were in possession of that gene, when would you express the cancer? You would express it by the time you were born. Because as soon as the cells started to divide, the cancer gene would say, okay, time to make cancer. So how can you have so-called cancer gene for 30 or 40 years sitting in your body and you don't have cancer and then you get cancer? Should I go back and say the gene caused that? And the answer is no. In this paper by Niehaut, Metaphors in the Role of Genes in Development, he played it out in a simple statement of truth that I'm going to show you because I want to use his paper because the statement is so perfect. But the fact is this. What did he say? He said this. For 50 years, we have believed that genes are in control. We've been repeating it and saying it over and over again for 50 years so that it's part of every textbook. And the bottom line was that was never a scientific reality. It was never scientifically established that genes control anything. It's not true. What is the truth? Well, the answer is this. The first thing, conventional belief, genes control biology, is totally false. Why? Genes can't turn themselves on. Genes can't turn themselves off. How are they going to control anything? They can't control themselves. So bottom line is the genes aren't in charge. So the question is, if I need a gene to be activated, and why would a gene be activated? To make the proteins for the cell that needs to do the behavior. So the truth statement is this: when a gene product is needed, a signal from its environment, not an emergent property of the gene itself, activates expression of the gene. Well, that's somewhat of a complicated sentence, so let's simplify it. Just read line 2 and line 4. And if we read that, it says, a signal from its environment activates expression of the gene. What does that mean? The genes in your body are selected not because they're self-selecting. The genes are always selected in response to the environment that you're in. So if you had that cancer gene and for 35 years, let's say, you stood around saying, hey, I don't have cancer, and all of a sudden cancer happened, are we going to go to the gene and blame the gene, or what would we actually look for as responsible if you understand the truth statement? The signal from the environment. What change in your life promoted activation of the gene that was sitting dormant for 35 years? We've been focusing on the gene all the time. The point is, we have to start focusing on the signals. The signals do this. Well, let me explain how this happens. When we look at a cell nucleus, this is where the chromosomes and the DNA is. I can stain the chromosomes, and you break open the nucleus, you can see all these different chromosomes. You have 23 pairs of chromosomes to make a human. They're called pairs of chromosomes because you get 23 chromosomes from your mother, 23 chromosomes from your father, and they're matched pairs. So, in fact, even I can see that one of these is from the mother and one of these is from the father because you can color code them. Well, it's a nice, interesting experiment, but the question is this: what am I staining? I'm not staining DNA. So what's in the nucleus? And the answer is this: 50% of the nucleus is DNA and 50% is protein. And the reason why we have a problem here is this: for 50 years, everyone was so focusing on the genes that when they wanted to study the DNA, what did they do? They'd go find a nucleus from the cell, they'd break it open, expose all the chromosomes, and you know what they do? Separate the protein from the DNA and then throw away the protein. And for 50 years, they've thrown away the protein in their focus on studying DNA. And now, all of a sudden, in the last few years, the question is, hey, what have we been throwing away? And the answer is the control. For 50 years, they've thrown the control away, what controls the genes, and studied pure DNA. There is no such thing as pure DNA in any organism. The DNA is always associated with the protein. So what's the function of the protein? Look how simple this is. The protein forms a sleeve around the DNA. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Imagine my bare arm is a gene. Let's say it's the gene for blue eyes. And I say, okay, can you read the gene for blue eyes, yes or no? Yes. Okay, but all of a sudden, well, what does the DNA look like when I put it back in the nucleus? Put the sleeve of protein on it. Can you read the gene for blue eyes, yes or no? If you want to read the gene for blue eyes, what do you have to do? Take the sleeve off. Well, the sleeve is protein. How does a sleeve come off? Here's the protein, and it's locked onto my arm. If you can remember back about 15 minutes ago, what is it that will cause the change in the shape of the protein? So when I add the signal from the environment, all of a sudden, then what happens is this: the protein changes shape, pulls away from the DNA. Now I can read the gene, and when the signal is removed, the protein will come back and cover up the sleeve again. So the bottom line was this: the gene was just sitting there all the time. It's whether the proteins are present or absent. So if I look at it this way, then we understand this. I said you were made out of protein. The understanding is that DNA is the blueprint for the protein. In conventional textbooks, because they've thrown away the protein for 50 years, they don't talk about this. Conventional talks about the DNA goes to the RNA, which is like a Xerox copy of the DNA, and the RNA is then turned into the protein. And then they talk about the primacy of DNA. That's what's in all the textbooks. You are a result of your DNA. But they've thrown away the protein. So when we put it back in, it says, the protein covers up the DNA. The protein is a sleeve. But to take the sleeve off, you actually have to have the environmental signal. So remember what Niehaut's quote was? A signal from the environment activates the expression of the DNA. So the bottom line right here is this. The environmental signal comes in and changes the shape of the regulatory protein, which removes the sleeve, exposes the DNA, and then I can make my proteins. So rather than the primacy of DNA, which is conventional thought, it's actually the primacy of the environment. It's the environment that selects your genes, not the genes themselves. So if I wanted to illustrate it, let's go back to our picture of how the cell worked. What I showed you was this. The signal from the environment activated the receptor, which activated the effector, and the effector activated the secondary signal to go down to the protein. Remember that picture just a minute ago? Well, here's the point. In this illustration, the protein's not there. And if I need the protein because the environmental signal, I have to respond to the signal, and the protein's not there, what would I need to do if the protein's not present in the cell? Go to the nucleus and activate the gene for the making of the protein, right? So let's watch the behavior of this as it happens. So basically what's going to happen is this. The environmental signal joins to the receptor, activates this whole process so that I activate this, but look, the signal goes down, the proteins are missing. If the proteins are missing, I need the proteins to make the proper response, but they're not there. So what I have to do then is take this signal and go into the nucleus of the cell where the DNA is. But the DNA is covered up by a sleeve of protein. And at periodic points, at every gene, there's a control protein called a regulatory protein. And you know what happens? The signal from the environment binds to the right gene by the shape. It doesn't bind to this one, wrong shape. Binds to this one. Now, what happens when a signal binds to a protein? Changes the shape of the protein. And watch what happens. As soon as I change the shape of the protein, I cause the sleeve to come off the DNA. And when that happens, look what I'm exposing. The gene is now exposed. And what am I going to do with this? Well, I need to make a copy of the gene called RNA, which then goes into the cell where it's turned into the protein. So the bottom line is, then I take the RNA molecule, make a copy of this DNA molecule, and then this is a blueprint of the gene, and this is called RNA, messenger RNA, and this blueprint is actually used to make the protein. So what's the understanding about this whole process? It says this, the gene is not exposed until the signal calls it into play. When the signal is gone, the sleeve covers it up, and the gene is now hidden. If this is a cancer gene, and it's not giving you cancer because it's not exposed, what will cause the cancer gene to express itself? The signal. So all of a sudden it says, then what signals from your environment are you perceiving that you are selecting negative genes or processes in your body? And all of a sudden we start to say, so let's do the same thing now without all the labels, real fast. The secondary signal goes down, the protein's missing. The secondary signal goes into the nucleus, finds the right gene by binding to the right regulatory protein, causing the regulatory protein sleeve to come off, exposing the gene. And once the gene's exposed, I make a copy of it called RNA, and this is what goes out into the cell and is used for the function and behavior of the cell. So what is the conclusion of all of this? And the answer is simply this. Perception controls genes. Understand? The genes did not control themselves. The perception was the signal that converted the sleeve of the DNA to come off. So the bottom line is perception not only controls behavior, but perception will actually go in and select which genes you're going to express. Now here comes the third part. The first part, perception controlled behavior because the protein was there. The second part, the signal shows up and the protein's not there, so the perception signal goes to the genes and activates the appropriate gene. Here's the third part. What happens if I run into a stressful environment and I don't have the appropriate genes to respond to that stress? Well, then you just have to say, well, the only way you're going to manage is to change the genes. Well, in conventional biology, the only way the genes change is a process called random mutation. This is in all the textbooks. What does it mean? It says this. I can chemically cause a mutation to occur, but what I can't control is the outcome. The outcome is always random. So the bottom line is that's where Darwinian belief comes in, that evolution was random changes in the genes, that genes are only changing by accident. That's conventional belief. Except 1988, this paper comes out in Nature by a man called John Cairns, and it changes the entire foundation of biology that we've ever held for the following reason. he tells us about a new kind of mutation called an adaptive mutation. The point about this mutation? That the genes are not changing randomly, but the environment is controlling the mutation, so that you're always adjusting your genes to fit what you see in the environment. And so that it's not random, it's environmentally directed mutations. Well, recently, this is a paper that just came out within the last year. The other one was 1988. This is a very interesting paper because what they showed was this. You can take a population of bacteria, put it into 5 test tubes, and put the same but very stressful environment into each of the test tubes, causing the bacteria to change their genes to survive. Here's the point. In each of the 5 test tubes, the result was exactly the same. Well, then all of a sudden it says, where's the random nature of that process? And the answer is not random. Evolutionary changes are always adapting to the environment. These miniature adaptive radiations unfold in the same way every time, governed by the available environmental niches. Here's the point. We adjust our genes to fit the environment that we think we live in. And I say we think we live in because perception may be right and perception may be wrong. And therefore, perception is belief. And if this is true, do you understand what this means? It's belief that changes your genes. It's your perception that changes your genes. It's not an accident. And so this chart out of Science, which is about Cairns' work about genetic changing, I marked this one with an asterisk because when this article came out, this box was called Genes of DNA Metabolism. There's now a new name for that. They're called genetic engineering genes. What this means is this. We have now found out that in every one of your cells, you have genes whose function it is to rewrite the other genes when necessary. So you are all equipped with an ability to adapt and change your genes as you respond to the environment. So all of a sudden it says this. The environment, watch where the arrow goes, the environmental signals activate genetic engineering genes. They can change your own genes and change your genotype. But this one, organisms' perception of the environment separate from the environment. Why? Because perception and environment may be 2 different things. I might say, I live in a toxic, hostile environment. But that might be my belief. I might be in a very supportive environment. So it says, my perception may differ from the reality of the environment. But nonetheless, what does perception do? Follow the blue arrow. Activates genetic engineering genes. Your own beliefs are selecting your genes. And if you don't have the right genes to handle the stress that you're in, your belief will rewrite your genes in an effort to do so. So all of a sudden it says there's a lot of control over your life, but it's mediated by the perception of the environment. That's what's controlling the whole thing. So our third conclusion is not only does the perception activate behavior, not only does the perception activate the genes, but when necessary, perception rewrites genes. So what's the conclusion? Are you genetically controlled? Are you at the behest of your heredity? Are you a victim? Absolutely not. Why? Because by adjusting your perception, you can adjust your behavior. By adjusting your perception, you can select different genes in your function. By adjusting your perception, you can rewrite your genes. Now, I wouldn't want you to rewrite your genes because 95% of us got here with very appropriate genes to survive and have a great life. Here's the problem. Almost always when you rewrite your genes, you do a negative process because your genes were already working. And so lots of illnesses and things like cancer, 95% of cancer has no hereditary linkage. 95% of cancer is actively produced by an individual's perception rewriting their normal genes and making cancer genes. All of a sudden, unfortunately, remember when I told you when you were a victim of your heredity, you could be irresponsible because the genes just came that way. If you understand what I'm talking about, then all of a sudden you say, oh my goodness, then how I see things, how I believe things are going on become important. The answer is, well, if you think your behavior or the selection of your genes or the rewriting of your genes is important, then the answer is yes, because all of these are connected to belief, because perception in humans is related to belief. So you have the ability to change anything in your body. Unfortunately, if you got here healthy and you change it, that usually means you're making it less effective as a living organism. So the bottom line is this: the perception of the environment, your nervous system sees the environment and interprets it. So here's the real environment, here are the cells. Interestingly enough, if I would take dystrophic patients and take muscle cells out of their body, in many cases when I took the cells out of the body and put it into a good environment, the cells grew beautifully and grew healthy and well. But when they were in the body, they didn't. Why? Because somewhere between the environment and the cell, the perception got involved with it. So our beliefs are altering our biology at every moment, at every time, okay? So the question is, what kind of beliefs and genes am I affecting? Here's this beautiful but very important, simple understanding. The genes in your cell are the equivalent of programs in a disk in a computer, okay? And the bottom line about it is this: what kind of programs then are in your body? And the answer is simply this: there are two classes of programs. One class is for growth and reproduction, which is a form of growth, and the other is for protection. So that the bottom line is this: when you walk into the environment, you're either going to select growth programs or you're going to select protection programs. And I'm going to explain why it's either or. I'll give you a simple understanding. I put a cell in a petri dish. And in one petri dish, I put nutrients here in front of the cell. In another petri dish, I put toxins in front of the cell. And then I wait for a period of time. What's going to happen? The answer is this: cells always move toward signals, nutrients or whatever, positive signals, because positive signals encourage growth. On the other hand, when a cell was confronted with a toxin, toxins threaten survival. So what does the cell do? It doesn't move to the toxin. What does it do? It moves away. And therefore, cells always move away from negative signals. Why is that important? If I'm a cell and there's toxins, there's food here, I'm going to move this way. If I'm a cell and there's toxins, I'm going to move this way. Can a cell move forwards and backwards at the same time? And the answer is no. Why is that relevant? And the answer is simply this: when confronted with an environmental signal, the cells have to make a decision to be in growth or to be in protection. Why is that relevant? Because when the cell is in protection, it stops growing. And the more protection we think we need, the more we shut off our growth mechanisms, and therefore we start stymieing our own health. Let me give you an example. Cells move toward positive signals as a mode of growth. Cells move away from negative signals as a means of protection. There are some signals that the cell doesn't even care about because it doesn't bother its growth or its protection. So there's some signals the cell doesn't really care, so there's zero. So the bottom line is this: cells are either moving in growth or cells are moving in protection, but they can't do both at the same time. That's an individual cell, but I said you were made out of 50 to 75 trillion cells, so when I look at a human, I have a graded scale. You are either in some degree of growth or you're in some degree of protection based on the signals. Here's the interesting aspect. The most important growth-promoting signal in the world today for a human is love. It exceeds nutrition. A child getting love will grow. A child not getting love will be stymied in its growth. For example, in Eastern European orphanages where kids are given a lot of nutrition but no attention, their growth parameters, their intelligence, their height, every aspect of their development is reduced by 30% or more, most of them becoming autistic. What is an autistic child? Think about it. An autistic child is not responding to the environment. Why not? Because somewhere in its development, it started to put up the walls of protection because it wasn't getting love, and at some point, it shuts itself down and is no longer responding to the environment that is the highest form of protection. But look what happens to the child. It will die from the process. And the issue is this: when you are in fear, you're shutting down your growth mechanisms. When you're in love, you're enhancing your growth mechanisms. And it's as simple as that. It's a dual strip, one way or the other way. And there's a mechanism for it. In your system, it's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The hypothalamus is the portion of the brain that gauges the signals. When the environmental signals come into the mind says, is that positive or is that a negative signal? It has to know. And the idea is this: if it's a negative signal, then what's going to happen is the stress is going to activate the pituitary gland. Remember the word pituitary gland in basic education? It was called the master gland. Why? Because the pituitary gland is going to control the shape of the body. So there's two shapes, growth or protection. In negative signals, what ultimately happens is this, in negative signals, what happens is this, that the stress activates the pituitary gland to get into fight or flight. Remember fight or flight? Here's the issue. I have two parts of my body that I can subdivide for you right now. This area has all the organs in it. This is the viscera. What do you think the function of the viscera is? Growth. This is the muscles and the bones, support. What else is it for? Protection. So here's the point. When I get into fight or flight, am I going to use my viscera or am I going to use my muscles to survive? The muscles. So here's what happens. The hormones released by the adrenal glands cause the blood vessels in the viscera to squeeze and push the blood to the periphery where the muscles are so I can feed my muscles and get ready to run. And the issue about that is, what was the function of the viscera? Growth. But if I take the blood and send the blood from the viscera to the muscles, what happens to growth? It stops. Under stress, you shut down your growth mechanism. Also, your immune system is a protection system, but the immune system doesn't protect you from lions. What does it protect you from? Bacteria and viruses, things that get under your skin. So the adrenal system is for protection against things in the environment that threaten you. The immune system is to protect you from things that get under your skin. So here's the point. If you're running away from a lion and you're in fight and flight, do you think you need the immune system? No. And in fact, because the immune system uses so much body energy, here's what happens. When the adrenal hormones get higher, it shuts off the immune system. As you get under stress, not only are you stopping your growth, but you're now shutting off your immune system. You find that at work or at school, when school comes to the end of the semester and everybody's under stress, that's when everybody starts getting sick. And the reason why is stress shuts off the immune system. It's so effective that medical doctors use the stress hormones to inhibit the immune system in people that they graft tissues and organs into. Why? I don't want them to reject the graft, so how do I stop them? Well, I want to shut off the immune system. I give them stress hormones. Well, if you're under stress, what are you doing to your own biology? You're opening yourself up for things to then come and attack you. And the last interesting aspect about it is simply this. When you're in fight or flight, are you going to use reflex behavior or are you going to use thinking and logic behavior to get out of the mess? Okay, why that's important? Because the hormones, remember I told you the hormones squeeze the blood vessels in the viscera and force the blood to the periphery? Well, the same hormones squeeze the blood vessels in the forebrain and push the blood to the hindbrain where reflex behavior comes from. Here's the point. Under stress, you are less intelligent. And you ought to know that if you've ever taken any school classes and you took that exam and you said, well, I know all the answers, right? And you sit down and you start doing the exam and you come to question number 7 and you go, I don't know this one. And guess what? You can feel your body tingling. Why? Well, the first thing is you're getting blood in your arms and legs ready to run out of the classroom, save your life. But then as you're doing this, you're realizing, I can't think of the answer. I can't think of the answer. So you say, okay, let me go to the next question. And that one's a simple one. You know what? You don't know the answer to that one. And the reason why? When you get under stress, you get ready for reflex behavior. Your conscious intelligence is reduced. So what does this mean in the world that we live in? Every time you turn on the news, every time you watch the TV, every time you listen to the radio, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid of this, be afraid of that. The air is bad. Flesh-eating bacteria are coming. So the bottom line is this. What do you think about your normal adrenaline levels in the population? They're so high, we're all under stress. People are getting sicker by the day, and we're getting less intelligent. So in conclusion, let me wrap it up and show you this. Here's the point. The body is like a camera for the following reason. Whatever the environmental signal is, it's picked up by the lens. So the camera sees something. The lens picks it up and translates it into the film where you make a complementary copy, so that the camera always makes a complement of what is found in the environment. Well, the truth is, in biology, it's the same thing. The cell is like a camera. Whatever is in the environment, the membrane is like a lens. It picks up the image and sends that image to the nucleus where the database is. And that's where the stored images are. And the interesting aspect about it is this. The cell will make a physical structure to complement the environment. So that's, if you're a diagnostician and you're looking at somebody's health, their physical expression is a reflection of the environment that they're in because they're making that mimic. So the bottom line is this: when you open your eyes, is this the image you see? The reason why: if you open your eyes and live in this stressful situation, what are you going to do to your physiology? Adrenaline, fight or flight, shut down growth, shut down the immune system, and be less intelligent. But you could easily look at the world and see a much better, healthier picture. For example, Maxfield Parrish's ecstasy. When you see this picture, so the question is, I could see this world and see this, and what do you think I'm going to be in, growth or protection? Growth. So the bottom line is, how I see it is adjusting who I am. Well, the interesting part about that is as follows. The perception interfaces between the environment and your biology. But your perception is belief. And therefore, beliefs act as a filter between the real environment and your biology. So your belief filters interfere if they're not accurate. If your beliefs are off, you're going to select genes that are inappropriate for the environment. So again, what keeps you in balance? Keeping your perception clear. So the bottom line is this: we actually end up with a filter between the environment and the camera, which is learned. We learned these filters. Before we were born, we were already learning. On the weekend course, I talk about conscious parenting. Many of your beliefs were already installed in you before you were born through the interaction of your mother and her perception of the environment, because she was helping. Mothers and fathers are actually are genetic engineers. They are selecting genes in their offspring as they develop, so the offspring fits the environment that the parents live in. Interesting point. Well, the question is this: we have filters. So now you've got envelopes that you came with. There's a red and green filter. Let's call these belief filters. And what I would like you to do is put one or the other filters in front of your eyes. Pick a red one or a green one, whatever one they got, and hold it up in front of your eyes and look at the screen. I'm going to ask you a question, and don't open them up if they're double. Keep them folded. Okay? Here you go. Now I'm going to ask you a question. When you look at the picture, tell me if this is a picture of love or fear. When you see it, does it look like love or fear with your glasses on? Put the glasses on. Are you living in love or are you living in fear? Okay, now take the glasses off and find the other glasses. Okay, you got a different set of glasses now? Okay, put those up. You ready? Are you living in love or are you living in fear? Okay, are you living in love or are you living in fear? Well, here's the simple point. This is the beautiful point. Life has everything in it. Life has everything, but you will only see what you have perception filters to see. And you were taught perception filters. You were taught by your parents. You were taught in school. You were taught how to see life. And here's the beautiful part. We can remove these filters that have interfered with our lives, and it does not take long. And the beautiful part is, after the break, when Rob Williams comes up here, he's going to show you and give you tools of how you can rapidly change your filter and in the process select healthier, more growth-satisfying genes than the ones that we tend to be selecting because of our concern about the environment. So the bottom line is this: you are all powerful. And the fact is, knowledge is power. With this knowledge, you have power over the unfoldment of your own life. You have power over which genes are going to be activated, which behaviors you're going to express. You are all powerful. You are not victims of genes. And the beautiful part about it is, all you have to understand is, what beliefs are you selecting genes with? And if they're not appropriate, you can change these beliefs. And this is the beautiful part about the second half of this program. Thank you very much for your attention on this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, you can take your seat belts off. We're going to calm down now a little bit. Isn't he something? Yeah. And I need the toy. Here we are. Well, what I'd like to do is to start where Bruce left off. Oh, by the way, just it occurred to me when I was being introduced about the 14 years in the business world, and Doug said, well, something made him transition. I can tell you it was living in fear for 14 years. It was living in protection. I don't know if you spend any time in the corporate world, but there's a tendency to circle the wagons and hope it's you're going to be saved. So I had done my time there. I saw a lot of pain. I saw a lot of opportunity, but in the position I was in, I couldn't do much with it. And so I really felt in the midst of really having everything that you're supposed to want. Good job, big bucks, all the creature comforts you could ask for. But what I noticed was my soul was hurting. I wasn't okay there. I wasn't okay just getting paid to do something I really didn't want to do and to sell something I didn't care about. So that was a crisis in a sense for me, but it was a real spiritual emergence as well. It was a coming out. It was a time to choose. Did I want to do my heart's desire, or did I just want to fold into the norm and do what I was expected to do? And I made the change. And 14 years later, I can highly recommend doing it. It's challenging at the time, especially when I did it and the way I did it, because I walked away from a very high-paying job, and it was a very good job by all people's standards, but it wasn't feeding the right part of me. So I'm here tonight, and I'm really grateful to Doug and to Bruce for the opportunity to share with you some of the things I've discovered over the last 14 years about the nature of change and about the nature of beliefs and their effect on our lives. So let's get going. I want to start with Bruce's conclusions, plus one that I added to the list. Do you remember his slide that said perception controls behavior? Very powerful words coming especially from a biologist. Perception controls the genes. Perception rewrites genes. And where I'm going with this is perception also rewrites behavior. I expect there's just 2 or 3 of you in the room maybe that might have a few behaviors you'd like to rewrite. I certainly did, especially 14 years ago, and so my search was to find the easiest, sanest, most effective, and quite frankly, the most painless way to do it. Graduate school didn't teach me about the painless part. In fact, it was all about go back, find the pain, work through the pain, and that's the only way to change your beliefs. I do have a different story to tell you at this point, quite a lot different than that schooling. The thing about perception, because Bruce used the word a lot and then he squeezed it together with the word belief, I'd like to make a little bit of a distinction there for us this evening. Perception, in my opinion, is awareness. The dictionary calls it awareness, but it's shaped by belief. Belief actually precedes perception. And I'm going to be talking about how that happens, but the important fact about it is that beliefs control your perceptions. If you rewrite the beliefs, you can rewrite perception. And if you rewrite the perception, you can rewrite the genes and the behavior. So there really is no distinction, if you're in the healing arts, especially the complementary ones, between mind and body. It's just a different expression of us, who we are. I want to define beliefs as a working definition anyway in the following way. Beliefs are conclusions derived from experience, information and or experience. They can be either conscious or subconscious. And what I mean by this, let me give you an example. Beliefs derived by conclusions from information would be the kind of thing that would happen if you got jury duty and you weren't at the event that's being tried. Let's say it's a criminal case. You weren't there present when the so-called crime was committed, but you're sitting in a jury situation. You're now required to listen to information from 2 attorneys telling you their story, getting you ultimately to come to some truth, some level of belief about what happened in that event you couldn't attend. So you're creating a belief through information alone. The second version of that is experience. Typical experiences, say you're 2 years old, imagine, and you've never experienced fire before. So you're crawling around and there's a candle left on and you're getting curious because you haven't had an experience with a candle or fire yet. So as most kids that are 2 years old, they'll move towards anything they don't understand to discover what it is. So you move closer and closer to that candle, and isn't it interesting? So you stick your little hand out, like you do with everything else, to touch it and grab it and see what it is like, and sure enough, you get burned. Well, as soon as you get burned, you've had an experience. Now it's not just curiosity that's associated with that candle. There's an experience and a conclusion that is drawn from touching that fire, which turns into a belief, which ultimately, as I'll show you, affects your future perception of candle. In the beginning, there's not much of a differentiated perception, but after an experience like that, there certainly is. And then I'm going to talk a lot more about the conscious and subconscious mind, because this is where, in my opinion, the greatest amount of ignorance exists in mainstream psychotherapy, is that we've been trying to change subconscious beliefs with lots of conscious means. And it turns out the two minds are so different that it's no wonder it doesn't work very well. Your beliefs actually determine your biological and behavioral reality. If I had to just describe Bruce's presentation in total in one statement, this would be it. Virtually every part of our lives is governed by our belief systems. And we'll talk about that a little more too. Do you remember this slide? Here's the filter representing our belief systems. And if you look at it from this point of view, it's really a powerful thing to witness. Beliefs are really the filters of reality. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. In fact, you can't not do that. It's the most interesting thing is that each of you sitting out there looking at this presentation are actually having a very different experience of it. You all have the illusion it's the same experience. You'll talk about having been here, but it's not the same experience for you at all. Your set of filters about who I am, what I'm saying, where this place is, how you're feeling right now, that all profoundly affects your experience of this evening. So you think, well, it was a fact, here's what happened, but then you start talking to your friend that you came with or someone else that attended this particular event, they had a very different experience. So it's always that way. And if you can remember that, as soon as you're thinking, well, I've got the facts straight about something, remember, the facts are your subjective opinion, your filters of reality. And that's what perceptions are all about. That's what really matters here. Beliefs create perceptions, and they affect virtually every area of your life, as I mentioned. Self-esteem, for instance. I mean, your perceptions either define you as worthy or worthless in relationships, either loved or unloved. With respect to prosperity, that's a pretty popular one. You either can attract money easily in your life, or your perception is it's hard to get and hard to keep, and you'd mismanage it anyway. You look at your job performance. If your perception of yourself as a competent person or an incompetent person, it's going to make a heck of a lot of difference in terms of how you perform your job, and also the perception of others, of course. Mental health, you can see yourself as generally a happy person or a depressed one. Physical health, I mean, Bruce's presentation makes that pretty clear. The psychology profoundly impacts the biology of the body. Spiritual outlook, we have so many different spiritual systems and ways of looking at the hologram of God, so to speak, and all of the facets of it, that it is about perception when we're looking that causes us to believe and act in the way we do. And of course the list goes on and on. You remember this slide? This is our friend Ecstasy. She represents joy. She represents growth in Bruce's model, moving towards something that's pleasurable. Do you remember this one? The Scream, it's called. So this one, of course, represents protection and fear. So my question to you is, if you had a choice, if you could choose between living like this, having your life and the undertone of your life being this feeling that you get when you look at this, or this, which would you choose? Oh no, let's review again. It's a tough choice. Would it be her? Or would it be him? All right, if you're having any trouble deciding here, or if you've decided you'd prefer this one, I only have one recommendation. See your doctor immediately and get your medication adjusted. Because under normal conditions, people are going to pick her. We want consciously to have our lives work. We want our lives to be filled with joy and pleasure and to look forward to each day. What prevents us from doing that? What is really the bottom line cause? How is it that your life maybe doesn't represent as much of this ecstasy as you'd like to have it represent right now? And I'll propose to you that what Bruce was telling you was absolute truth, and I'm just going to add a little bit to it. Whether you're living in growth and protection makes all the difference in the world. What determines that? Well, I can messages as a child versus I can't messages are one of the big ways that that determination happens. If you receive more positive input from your environment, generally your parents for instance, and you were told that you were lovable, you were told that you could accomplish anything, you were told you were good enough, you were told that you were wonderful, then you're probably having a life that reflects that more now than anybody could imagine, versus if you were told more I can't messages. You're not good enough, you'll never amount to anything, you're not smart enough, all those things that many of us heard. Those go in just like experiences. Those are experiences. They're just information driven, they're parentally induced usually, reinforced by society, and so we end up with a series of experiences that either put us primarily in growth or protection from our perception of life. Turns out our childhood programming becomes our habits of perception and behavior. You get your programs early on. By about 5 years old, the psychologists will tell you, your personality is pretty well set. What they mean by that is, you've had enough experiences to draw conclusions about yourself, and now you're either looking at yourself through the growth or protection filters. The good news is, even if you have produced these filters and you have habits that are supporting the perceptions and the behaviors that you don't want, they are changeable. They are changeable. Habits are usually the things that bug us the most because they are what they are. Habits are things that happen out of your conscious awareness. It doesn't seem like you have any control over them. You consciously try to control the habit. You say you're not going to do something, but you do it anyway. So I want to explain to you how the cycle of habituation occurs, why it occurs, and then ultimately how you can break that cycle. These cycles are really self-reinforcing, and let me see if I can explain this to you. I'm going to use the candle as a model because we talked about that earlier. If you're 2 years old and you're having your first encounter with fire, and it happens to be connected to a candle, and you crawl over to this fire, and it's a very interesting thing. You've not formed any opinions about candles or fire yet because you've never touched anything that was hot, and now you do for the first time. All of a sudden you've got an experience. The experience is hurt, ouch. That shapes the perception. The candle's no longer a general thing. Now it's a thing that could create pain. You have a perception of the candle. The perception creates a belief that candles are dangerous, or at least fire is dangerous. You've got it connected to the candle, but the main thing is the fire. That perception then shapes your experience of this candle. The experience reinforces the beliefs. What happens is, the next time you see a candle, instead of crawling over to it and sticking your hand in the candle, your perception of the candle as a possible source of pain keeps you from doing that. The fact that you're not going to go over there and stick your hand in that candle again, you'll never again have the same nebulous sort of perception. You're going to have a very specific perception of candles, and you're going to watch out for it. Now, whether as a child you learned about hot from sticking your hand in the fire and you got burned that way, or as you get older you have more complex experiences, you get burned in other ways. You get burned in relationships, as they say. That's a very complex form of burn, but it's a burn nevertheless. And it usually leaves a mark so that next time when you look at that situation, whether it's a relationship or whatever it was where you got hurt, you're going to move away from that. You're going to move into protection. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle. So some of the good cycles, like learning that fire is hot and to keep your hand out of it, is wonderful. You don't want to interrupt those cycles. But what about the cycles of self-deprecation? What about the cycles that say you're not good enough? What about the cycles that aren't very generative, that you'd like to get rid of? Then it would be important to be able to break the cycles. Basically, breaking the cycle amounts to rewriting the software of your mind, because then you can change the printout of your experience. As Bruce said so eloquently, it's about your perception. If you can change how you perceive the environment, essentially how you can perceive yourself in the environment, you can change the environment. You'll be treated differently the second you treat yourself differently. We're told that, day in and day out by all the positive thinkers, but they stop at that part. And then what do you do? Well, there is something you can do, but how do you do it? It requires two things, really, information and tools. I'm going to give you a little bit more information, and then we'll get to the tool part. And please understand that with respect to the tools and the confines of my situation tonight, which is 1 hour, not 2 days in a workshop, I'll be able to hopefully demonstrate at least one of the psyche change processes that I've developed over the years, so that you can get an idea of how quickly a belief you may have had all of your life actually can change, and how you can verify that it's different as soon as it changes. So we'll be doing both things. Now, one of the key pieces of information you need to be aware of that makes all the difference in the world is that you don't have one mind, you have two. I mean, haven't you ever tried to change your mind only to find out your mind is a mind of its own? Bet you have. And I'll bet you relate to some of these things down here, the ways in which people try to do that. If you've ever promised yourself you'd get in shape, but then you didn't. Ever made a New Year's resolution you didn't keep? Ever tried to quit smoking? Try to stop procrastinating. That's a favorite one. You swore you'd never get involved with another relationship, but you do. And the list goes on, and you can fill in your favorite personal one down there about what you've tried to change, and you said you wanted to change it, so there's a conscious intention, a commitment. You're a bright, energetic, committed person, but somehow it just doesn't come off. It doesn't happen, even with your intention focused in that direction. Let me give you a little rundown on how different those two minds are, because this is very important in understanding the nature of how change can take place very quickly and why it's been so difficult with the tools we've been given for the past 35 years, which are mostly positive thinking, affirmations, willpower, that sort of thing. I don't know about you, I tried them all. You know, they worked maybe 20% of the time, very frustrating, but it was best we had at the time, so people kept doing it. Just say your affirmations, just do that meditation, just do it over and over and over again. The problem was, it turns out, we were mostly talking to the wrong part of the mind that's in charge of habits, in charge of the change. Look, conscious mind's volitional. It sets goals, judges results, and it likes to try new things. That's the one that says, hey, there's something good happening, let's go out and do it. Let's go into an environment we've never been in. Let's ride the killer roller coaster. Let's do a bungee jump, you know. It's the one that would say, hey, that's a great idea. But your subconscious mind didn't like that at all. Subconscious mind says, it's busy monitoring the operations of your body, basic things like motor functions, heart rate, digestion, and it prefers the familiar. It's the part of you that likes to play it safe. It wants to know what's going to happen in the next moment. It doesn't want something new to contend with. Its basic job is to keep you alive and safe. So why would it want to bungee jump or get on a roller coaster? It's not interested in that. So remember, volitional and habitual, two different components of you completely. The conscious mind thinks abstractly. It's conceptually based. The subconscious mind thinks literally. It sees the world through your five senses. Bruce mentioned the five senses. You're going to see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. That's the only way the subconscious mind can know reality. The conscious mind is the one that reads all those self-help books. It's the one that says, yeah, aren't we inspired? Let's go for it. It's got all of that energy about what you're going to do. It thinks up all those really great ideas. But without communicating the ideas to the subconscious mind adequately, you usually don't go anywhere. You get very excited. You ever been to motivational speeches? I mean, just plain flat motivational speeches. I mean, when I was in the corporate world, boy, we just did a lot of those. And I'd go into those things and they'd just whip you into a frenzy. I was clapping and stomping and yelling and screaming and I was so happy. And then as soon as that motivational speaker left, so did the motivation. If you didn't get him or her to come back, which is the point of it, of course, if you come back and get that fixed, you get cranked up again. But there's a better way to do that. There's a better way to get to that place and to stay there, and it has nothing to do with motivation, actually. The conscious mind is responsible for short-term memory, the subconscious mind for long-term memory. Now, the short-term memory has a little trick to it. I don't know if you know this, but it's an interesting fact. The average length of short-term memory in human beings is about 20 seconds long, short-term memory. Now, I thought that was really interesting because do you know how long it takes to look a phone number up in a phone book, take the coins out of your purse or pocket, and get them into a machine and dial that? 25 seconds. God's little trick. Yeah. So you can't quite pull that off in short-term memory. The subconscious mind is a very important aspect of this change process that I'm going to be sharing with you because it is responsible for long-term memory. A critical element. If you get up in the morning and you've forgotten basic things that you learned when you were a child, like say walking, things like that, driving as an adult, you'd have to relearn everything every morning when you got up. So you don't have to do that, and you can thank your subconscious mind because it remembers all of those things. It's taken all of that conscious learning and turned it into habitual understanding. Think about driving for a minute. When you first learned how to drive a car, how many learned on a stick shift? I'm just curious. Are you old enough to have? Okay. Yeah, well, me too. And it was a nightmare. I don't know about you, but I'm sitting in this little car, and I've got a gear shift over here. It was on the column. That's how old I am. It was on a column shift, and I got 2 feet, but they're 3 pedals. I'm thinking bad engineering right away. You know, it's a problem. What am I going to do with those? Then you got mirrors. You got people coming this way, people behind you. You got to steer the darn thing. You got a clutch, accelerator, brake. I mean, it was completely overwhelming, not counting my father who was sitting next to me, yelling at me the whole time because he wanted to save his transmission in that car, and I'm popping the clutch, and it was an awful experience. But eventually, having survived it, I was able to move into an automatic version of driving, and now I don't think about it at all. In fact, most people don't think about driving at all. I noticed since I got here anyway. This is a very interesting place. But you know, the beauty of it is you can have a conversation on the way from point A to point B. You don't remember driving at all. You had a great conversation, but somehow you get there. What's that about? I mean, who's paying attention? Fortunately, you have a very powerful part of you that is paying attention. That's your subconscious mind. That gets you around when you're doing the things that are really fun, and it takes care of most of these baseline things that would consume all our time if we had to do them consciously. All right, the conscious mind is time-bound, which means it's past and future-based. And for most conscious minds, if you're living with the scream mentality, you spend most of your time regretting your past and agonizing over the future. So that's not very much fun. Your subconscious mind is timeless, however. It thinks in the proverbial present moment only. So when you're talking to the subconscious mind, this fact is very important. It doesn't understand future tense requests. If you put your request, what you want, in a future tense for the subconscious, it mostly yawns and goes back to digesting your dinner because it doesn't get it. So you have to talk present tense. Now that seems a little crazy from your conscious mind's point of view because it's thinking, well, that hadn't happened yet. If I'm making up this statement that I want to be true, shouldn't I say I want it to be true? Only if you're trying to convince your conscious mind. So there's some rules about how you address and communicate with the subconscious that are very important to making it all work. Another difference, very important one, the conscious mind has limited processing capacity, maybe 1 to 3 events it can handle at a time. If you're at home and the phone rings and you're watching a TV program and somebody walks in from the kitchen and they want to talk to you, about that time when those 3 things are going on, you're saying, wait a minute, one thing at a time, you know, I got to stop now. Because you really can't process. It only is processing at about a rate of 2,000 bits of information per second, which sounds wonderful and kind of awesome in its own way, unless you compare it to the subconscious mind, who has expanded processing capacity, can process thousands of events at a time, and averages 4 billion bits of processing capacity in a given second. That's an incredible difference. But if you think about it, this part of your mind would have to do that. Remember, it's in charge of motor functions. You can't walk, talk, digest your food, do respiration, digestion, or any of that without a huge amount of processing capacity. You couldn't sit up in your chairs. Because what you take for granted, you just say, well, I'm going to do that. You turn on your volition part, which is your conscious mind, and say, let's walk from here to there. But you know, you can't walk from here to there consciously. If your subconscious mind doesn't agree, you aren't going anywhere. And that's true of your beliefs changing too. And we're getting to that. All right. It's easier to change habits of thought and behavior if you access the subconscious mind because it's the storehouse for attitudes, values, and beliefs. This is where doing your basic affirmations every day, which are generally so abstract that the subconscious mind can't understand it. It really doesn't care what you're trying to do because you haven't engaged it in any way, shape, or form. And you're talking to the wrong part of the mind in the first place. The subconscious mind is where all these attitudes, values, and beliefs are stored. So if you don't learn how to communicate with it properly, you aren't going to get very far. You're going to be very frustrated. And that's exactly what I was. That's why I'm sharing with you these a whole different approach. All right, so as the easiest and most effective way to communicate with the subconscious is through a process called muscle testing. And I'll bet you a bunch of you in this room have had some experience with muscle testing. Is that true? Can I see a show of hands? All right. So I'm going to ask you temporarily during this discussion and also an experience that I'd like you to have to forget everything you know about it right now. Pretend you don't have any preconceived notions about it. Humor me. There's some things that are very important about using muscle testing in a psychological way that are very different from using it in almost every other way. Vitamin mineral supplements, it's very popular. In applied kinesiology, clinical kinesiology, you're looking for organ distress, meridian dysfunctions, and so on. I'm not going to be talking about any of that, but I'm going to be talking about some key elements to using it as an accurate measure of what's going on in your subconscious mind, what those beliefs are and what they're not. Okay. We're going to have a little experience, and I'm going to ask someone to help me up here to demonstrate muscle testing a la Psyche. Psyche is the name of the name I give the work that I do. And I want to show you when I'm using it as a psychological tool to access the subconscious and check for beliefs, how to set up an appropriate communication system. And the key here is appropriate. You want to get a true-false message system going. In other words, a conflict detector. You're measuring the truth between what your conscious mind says or is affirming and what your subconscious mind believes. Very important to be able to do that credibly. Like-dislike is essentially equivalent to a stress detector. I learned this one to use muscle testing in this way when I got out of graduate school. I was doing sort of mainstream counseling. That's the insight-based talk therapy version where you come in and we sit down together and you tell me all your woes and I nod and say, yeah, that's interesting, tell me more about that. And you do. And then you come back next week and you tell me more about that. And come back next week, you tell me more about that. Well, I got tired of hearing it, they got tired of talking about it, so I figured something's got to change here. And a part of me, which was really the business part, just said, wait a minute, there's got to be some kind of outcome here. I mean, business is all about outcomes, all about bottom line. Turns out therapy, as I was taught in graduate school, is all about process. You just stay in the process. It's good for you. Oh, where's the part where you get out and get a life? I mean, you know, when does it end? Well, apparently it wasn't supposed to end. I never got that. So I thought, well, that's not right. So we're going to do something about that. So in the like-dislike thing, what I found was interesting was I'd get people coming in, they'd fill out this intake form, and I'd always ask, have you had any other kind of counseling? And oh, yeah, and they're putting it down there, 15 years of psychotherapy and all that. That's no joke. And they would say, I'd say, okay, so, and they're writing down what their primary presenting problem is, what they're trying to deal with. And they just write down stuff about, I said, what about your childhood? Tell me about your relationship between your mother and the father, you know. So I remember this one client wrote down, yeah, well, I've dealt with my mother, you know, she was very abusive psychologically and physically, and but, you know, I've dealt with that and I'm over it. And I said, oh, that's good. So we got to the muscle testing part, and I just had her stick her arm out, and I was going to do a little muscle test, a stress detector style. And I said, think about your mother. So she did. And guess what happened? She just crashed and burned. I mean, she was a mess. The muscle response was very clear that just thinking about her mother still stressed her. All of those years of psychotherapy, all of those years of putting together reasons why I've now forgiven my mother, never got to the subconscious mind, which controls the motor functions, which controls the autonomic nervous system, which controls your biology, and ultimately your health. You know, Bruce mentioned, do you remember about the biology and the effect on our immune systems? There are a whole set of beliefs that are immune-enhancing beliefs and a whole set of beliefs that are immune-suppressing beliefs. And if you look at the personality profiles of people who get various diseases, it becomes very interesting in a hurry. There's a whole field called psychoneuroimmunology, about 35 years of study in this country anyway, showing that people, for instance, cancer patients, one of the key qualities and attributes, personality characteristics of cancer patients is long repressed anger and hatred. They're really angry at somebody else, but if you hold that anger inside you, guess where it gets directed? It's your immune system. So the question is, how do you let go of stuff like that? We're going to be getting to that. So third down here is setting up a yes or no communication system, because in this work that I do, it's essential that you can communicate with the subconscious in a way to ask it questions and let it determine even what process is going to be used within this model of Psyche that I use. There are a variety of belief change processes, just as there would be if I was a carpenter and I had my little bag of tools. I'd have a pair of pliers and a screwdriver and a hammer at the very least. Because otherwise, if you just handed a hammer and you say, go build that house, well, you better find a lot of nails, because that's all you're going to be able to deal with. So you need some way to communicate yes or no, get yes or no communication from the subconscious. The last little note here, and I'll demonstrate this in just a second with someone, is where you position your eyes when you're muscle testing for psychological responses matters, as it turns out. And I'll show you, I'll demonstrate that for you. I learned this through, actually this little piece of it, through studying NLP years ago. They had made a big deal out of where your eyes are focused in terms of how you're processing in your brain. And what I found out when I first was introduced to muscle testing as a means of communication was that sometimes it seemed to answer correctly and sometimes the answers were really bogus. And I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And I finally pieced the mystery together and I figured out, wait a minute, sometimes people are saying things they're having no emotional response to at all. Your arm doesn't operate automatically. It doesn't go strong or weak for no particular reason. If you're not having a response to it internally, then the electrical signal sent from your brain to the muscle has no effect. So I want to show you how that works, and then I'd like you to just have an experience of this, because when I do a demonstration up here, I want you to be wired into what's actually going on and not just watching me do something up here that you're not familiar with. So I would like to invite someone who would like to help me demonstrate this muscle testing process to come up. Okay, would you mind? That's great. And you might want to come over here. And you are? Juliana. If you'll come over here, which arm would you like to use for muscle testing? You most comfortable with this one?
Right arm.
Okay. So let's see if we can get you in some light and me in some light. This is good. Okay. I'm going to demonstrate all three of these things, and then I'm going to have you do just one for the sake of time and for your experience. But what I'm doing is I'm standing next to Juliana's arm. Rather than in front of her like this, I want her to be able to have clear vision over here and me out of her line of fire. So we're not exchanging too much information in our biofields right now. So Juliana, what I'd like you to do is the following. I'm going to be pressing down on your arm gently. I've got my hand here on your wrist rather than on your hand, and my other hand gently on your shoulder. Okay, I'm going to be pressing down. I want you to resist that pressure, okay? But with your eyes, I'd like you to actually put your nose out here in this direction, and not your head, but just your eyes focused towards the floor. Actually, I'm sorry, you can turn your nose over here. You're doing great. And just put your eyes towards the floor. And hold them right there. I'm going to press down. Let's just do this together. And I'll tell you before I press, because I'm going to say the words be strong, okay? Here we go. Be strong. Good. Now, I'm just calibrating to find out what that's like. Am I pressing okay? It's not too hard? It's not? Okay. Let's try out some stuff and see what happens. So we're going to go with the first communication link up here. I'm going to have you say something that we know is true about you, and I'm going to ask you to do this one. This is the one that you will do as an experiment. So I want you to use your name, because it's something your subconscious probably agrees with unless you're going by an alias. So I want you to look down, and out loud, Juliana, I'd like you to say, my name is Juliana.
My name is Juliana.
And be strong as I press. Good for you. So let's have you lie now. This is a really important thing. In fact, I'll set this up. If you get away with this and you can keep your muscles strong, everybody out here will give you $20. Okay? Hey, pretty good, huh? I just spent your money. I hope you're okay. You're rooting for me now, aren't you? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to, again, with your face out here, but your eyes towards the floor. Let's make you somebody else completely, like some guy named Bill. We'll make you male. Your name is Bill. So I want you to say out loud like you really mean it. Okay. My name is Bill.
All right, my name's Bill.
Be strong, Bill. And see what happens. I'm pressing gently, but her arm is actually moving down rather than locking in place. I know all of you can't see that exactly, but trust me on this. Can you feel the difference?
Yes.
Yeah, it's dramatic to her and to me, and I'm pressing very lightly. It's not about pressing harder. It's about when she says something that isn't true, roughly, you can rest your arm, roughly what's happening is the equivalent to what happens in a polygraph machine. The brain is actually changing frequencies. The signal is changing. It's going into conflict because there's no file in there, either the gender file, which says she's a female and she's affirming she's male, and the name file crashes because her name isn't Bill, it's Juliana. So two things are going on that create conflict at the brainwave level. The signal, electrical signal from the brain to the muscle is what causes the muscle to go weak. It's not that her muscle mass changes or that I have to press any harder. It's simply a restricted signal because of the confusion, the conflict in the brain. That electrical signal is diminished. The muscle response is much, much weaker. So if you can detect this difference, you can set up this binary code. It's a natural biofeedback mechanism built into every one of us. So if you use it properly, it's very, very wonderful to find out what's going on at levels of your consciousness that you can't find out consciously about. So let's do the next one. Let's do an experiment with like-dislike. So what I'd like you to do is this. I'd simply like you, again, with your face out here, your eyes focused towards the floor, think of something you like, a circumstance, a situation you really like to be in, and get the feeling of being in it, and then let me know when you're there.
I would like to be in?
You would like, yeah. Feeling a situation you like to be in.
Okay.
It can be something you've already done, but you can think about it and go, yeah, I like that.
Okay.
You got it? Mm-hmm. You're real strong. She's really strong to that. She likes that a lot. So we won't have you talk about that, okay? All right. Okay. I want you to switch gears. I want you to think of something that you don't like, equally powerful, but the opposite of that pleasant feeling. And take your time and let me know when you've gotten into that feeling. Something you don't like. Oh, you can think of a food or a person or...
Okay.
Oh, that helped. What, was that the person one she went to? Okay. Take your time. You have to get into the experience of it. And you let me know when you're feeling the feeling of it. Got it? And be strong. Sure enough. Can you feel that? It's real dramatic over here. So she's going very weak to that feeling. I don't have to know what it is, but I can tell it stresses her. It's real easy. We're using this as a stress detector. And the final one is to set up a yes or no communication system. This can be done very simply. All I want you to do in your mind silently is just repeat the word yes over and over and over in your head. So just listen to it silently. And be strong as I press. Good. Repeat the word no. Hear that over and over. And be real strong. Feel the difference? Yeah. Can you see a little bit of her movement? Because she's moving and that arm is dropping real easily and I'm pressing very gently. This isn't a wrestling match. I mean, some muscle testers just want to yank on your arm and they got all kinds of agendas and stuff. It isn't about that. It's just pressing hard enough on the arm to detect whether the muscle locks in place or unlocks. Because as long as you're getting strong and weak responses and your intention is clear about what you're testing, you have a really powerful internal communication system going on here. So let me propose the following. Given our seating arrangement, I want to suggest this. Instead of standing like I'm standing with Juliana this way, I want you to, in a minute, you'll be standing up where you are, pick a partner that you're close to, and actually stand facing me and have your arm come out towards the back of the chair in front of you. Stand to the side like this. That way you don't hurt anybody. Because your arm's coming out this way, not to your side. There's not much room to the side. You're going to have your partner do the following thing. I just want you to use the truth detector for right now, just to have this experience. The way this happens is this. You're going to take your hand, put it gently on top of the wrist, not on the hand that bends here, but on the bone up here. Your other hand, just rest it gently on the shoulder of your partner. They're to be looking, their face is straight, but their eyes are looking down. If your eyes are looking down, you will be emotionally connected to the statement you're making. If your eyes move around, this may not work for you. So this is very important. Head straight, chin parallel to the ground, eyes focused down, and then have your partner say, my name is, and use your real name. So one more time, Juliana.
My name is Juliana.
And be strong. And I want you to say be strong just before you press, okay, to warn the partners. Because if you just jerk like that or you start pressing when they're not ready, you can't tell when the muscle's strong or weak. So let's switch gears. We'll make you somebody else again. This time you can be some guy named Jim. Imagine you're Jim. Say, my name is Jim.
My name is Jim.
Strong, Jim. You feel the difference? Yeah, it's really dramatic and you just press gently. I want you to have this experience because after a little while I'm going to use this muscle testing connection to demonstrate one of the belief change processes. So take about, it won't be more than 2 to 5 minutes at the most. I'll yell at you after a while, but I'd like you to have the experience both ways of doing muscle testing this way and just see how it turns out. Thank you very much, Juliana. Go ahead. Going okay? Yeah.
I went over a little bit, but not too much, 5 or 10 minutes.
It's okay.
Anybody else looking for a partner?
Remember to focus your eyes down. Look down at the carpet. Okay, and when you've finished, have a seat. When you've finished the experience, have a seat, and I'll know you're getting ready. All right. Let's bring it back. All right, how was that? Is it okay? Work? Yeah. That's good. There's a question. I'm sorry, I can't hear the question.
Well, my name is George, according to the muscle test.
Uh-huh. And you wonder why, yes. Okay, a couple things can be going on. One is eye position. Your head has to be up, not cocked down looking straight. That's why your chin has to be parallel to the ground and your eyes are focused down during the testing. If that's happening, then you will be more associated, more emotionally engaged in what's happening when you're talking. When you say something is true, there'll be a stronger sense of reaction in your physical body, and that's what causes the muscle testing to work. It isn't a mystical experience. It's a biological, neurological experience. It's really a very cheap biofeedback machine that you carry around connected to you, your physical body. So used properly, it will work fine. The other possibilities, and I don't have time to discuss them right now in terms of the anomalies, sometimes people will test weak to everything. There's a specific reason for that, and it turns out that's an easy correction. Sometimes they'll test strong to everything no matter where their eyes are looking. And if you're strong to everything, that's another condition in the body that's happening at the time, and there's a corrective procedure for that. But even here, I bet you there 90+% of you had the experience as you normally would, and a small percentage may need some kind of tweaking, in other words, to make it work really well. If you've never experienced muscle testing before, sometimes it can just be plain surprising. It worked. What's that about? Because consciously you walk around thinking you're in control of your body and your behaviors and your responses and all of that, and the fact is mostly you're not. Mostly you have your subconscious mind running the program, both behaviorally and biologically, and you're just not used to accessing it and experiencing it consciously. So muscle testing is a simple way to do that. So, on we go. Not only do you have two minds, you have two hemispheres of the brain, and this is one of the key pieces also associated with the change process. And I'm going to give you just a quick course, Hemispheres 101 here, so we can move along. Most of you are familiar with the basic concept of brain dominance theory. You have a left brain and a right brain, a left hemisphere and right hemisphere. The left side of your brain is really the primary center for logic, linear thinking. It's the primary speech center, so that's where your words come from. It tends to be analytical. It breaks things down into parts rather than putting them together, and it just loves the order and control of things. That's the part of you that thinks it's really good to get to work on time and to get your jobs done on time and can balance your checkbook and all those things that are a function of ordinary life. So it's a good thing we have that hemisphere. But it's not the hemisphere where you have much fun, I notice. So you want to take into consideration the right brain, the right hemisphere. It's where your emotions are. It's where pictures are made in your head instead of words. It tends to synthesize rather than analyze. It puts things together rather than breaks them apart. And it tends to be the one that enjoys that feeling of being spontaneous and free. So when the weather's great and you could go do something really fun, that's the part that argues, let's go. And the other side says, no, we've got to get our work done first. So sometimes they compete, in fact, almost always, for your attention. And control of your system, by the way. The arrows down at the bottom represent this crossover relationship between the hemispheres of the brain and the side of the body that they control. For instance, the left hemisphere of the brain controls motor functions on the right side of the body, and vice versa. The right hemisphere controls them on the left. Now, there's a word down at the bottom, or two words down at the bottom. Corpus callosum is a bundle of nerve fibers. They're like, think of them as fiber optic links, millions of them, part of a very sophisticated commissure system that is a communication pathway between the left and the right hemisphere. On a good day, when both hemispheres are talking to each other, you're getting a lot of crosstalk going, that communication system is wide open. So it's really a bridge between the hemispheres. And when things aren't going so well, or you get stressed, as Bruce was talking about, the fight or flight response, what typically happens here is that commissure system, that corpus callosum, shuts down, like it becomes a barricade rather than a bridge to crosstalk. And so you will go into a favored hemisphere to deal with a given situation. It's not that people are all left brain or right brain. The research was very clear about that, but the pop culture didn't get that part. It's much easier to write about, oh, what are you, left brain or right brain? Well, guess what? You got two hemispheres and you're both. The issue is, in a given situation, if you learn to over-identify with the qualities and attributes of one hemisphere versus the other, you will do that habitually until that's changed. The ideal circumstance, obviously, is to have both hemispheres working all the time, to be in a state I call the whole brain state, because then you have all the qualities and attributes available to deal with almost any situation. You don't automatically go into protection in a situation unless it's warranted, and then you can go there, because sometimes fight or flight's a good thing. You got to get out of there, get the blood out of the viscera, get it to the limbs, and get out of Dodge. So it's all right to have that happen, but you want to be able to control it. You want to be able to perceive your reality through both hemispheres at the same time. This little tidbit will come up in a little while, so I just wanted you to have a working reminder about it. The other thing is, the mind is not the brain. This is a very important concept. Bruce alludes to it all the time because he talks about it's about energy. I mean, in the final analysis, the physicists tell us it's all energy. So you've got a whole bunch of people here and here are complementary healers, and you say, well, do you do energy work? Show me something that isn't energy work. Allopathic medicine is energy work. What do you think the pills are? It's all molecules vibrating at some frequency. You're just ingesting them or injecting them or doing something, but it's all energy work in that sense. You can't not do energy work. Everything's energy. So remember that mind can really be described more aptly than calling it the brain as photons of light held in an electromagnetic field. We're talking about moving energy here. That's what healing's about. That's what change is about. That's what the mind is about. The brain is the gray matter inside your cranium. It's like the CPU chip in a computer. It's the physical thing that you can crack open your cranium and you got this thing in there, but that's not the mind. That's just the brain. That's a different deal altogether. It may be the central processing unit, the place where the energy patterns interpenetrate, but you know it's not even limited to the brain. Those of you who know about the energy field in general know that mind is not a function of just a connection to the brain part. There's some really important, long-standing myths about change that I need to address before I demonstrate what I want to show you. And that is, myth number one, if you've had a limiting belief for a long time, it'll take a long time to change it. Boy, that's a common one. I got so many people say, oh, it's so deeply embedded, Rob. You know, I've had this belief for 35 years, and it's just ingrained, and use all these anthropomorphic terms about how deeply it's embedded in your brain. You know, well, how deep could it be? You know, it's how many centimeters in there? You could get your finger in there and get one of the deepest ones. It's not like it's miles deep. What's that about? But we keep characterizing it in a way that makes belief change difficult. If you look at the reality of it, if it's photons of light held in an electromagnetic field, that's a different story. It isn't about deep. All right. Anyway, most of the time, changing subconscious beliefs is more like changing a document in a computer. The computer is photons of light held in an electromagnetic field. It's an energy phenomenon. You can't go into your computer and dig in there. How deep can you get into the hard drive? I mean, it's a little chip. It's the same concept, and we've really made it hard. It doesn't take any longer to change a document that's been in there for 30 years as it does it's been in there for 30 minutes. And that's mostly true with belief systems people have carried around for years and years. I've just watched this happen in private practice over and over again, and in the classes I teach, people would say, oh, I've had this belief for 50 years. I mean, it's just remarkable, just remarkable. I had one quick story about that. A psychiatrist is using a psyche in Denver. He had taken the classes, and he had, one of his patients was agoraphobic. You familiar with agoraphobia? It's a fear of being out in the marketplace in open places and so on. She'd had this agoraphobia since she was since she was a teenager, because she'd had it for over 50 years, and she was 60 plus years old. And it turns out it was an event that occurred in the eastern plains of Colorado. Her mother had taken her on a trip, and she was misbehaving, and so the mom said, you know, if you don't get your act together pretty soon, you're going to get out of the car and I'm leaving you. You know, today we'd be all traumatized by that, but back in those days, that's what your parents did. That's how they stayed in control. So the woman actually did stop the car because the kid kept misbehaving, put the child out, and she drove down the road. Well, not very far, but far enough to scare this little kid. And so she comes back, picks up the girl's in tears, piles her in the car, and they take off. Well, it didn't take long before the little girl started to show these signs of fear of going out into open places. There are many places that are quite as open as the eastern plains of Colorado. I mean, it's a flat desert-looking place. So she had this association with this place and with this fear, and nothing they had done. They tried drugs, they tried all kinds of therapies of various kinds, and this psychiatrist had just taken this IK class, a weekend class, the one I'm teaching this weekend, as a matter of fact, and so he got to a place with her. He just said, look, I've tried everything else. I got to admit, I just went to this weekend workshop. I don't know if this will work or not, if it has anything to do with it. So he didn't really believe in it. And then she didn't believe in it because she said, well, how can something like this affect a biochemical disorder? I mean, how can it work? And they both said, well, what the heck, we'll just give it a shot. They did. In that one session, that agoraphobia disappeared. That woman was out driving a car within a week, going wherever she wanted. She had relatives she hadn't seen in the area unless they came to her house, because she couldn't leave her house for all of those years. So it's just, that was a wonderful story and an amazing testimonial to the fact that I don't care how long you've had something, it boils down to photons of light held in an electromagnetic field, and if you can find the address of that belief and you can rewrite that software, you can change the outcome. So keep that in mind when you're saying, oh, I've had that for a long time. That'll be a tough one. Not necessarily. Myth number 2, changing old behaviors and thought patterns is difficult and often painful. This is the no pain, no gain myth. You got to suffer first, and then you can change. Not so. Thought patterns and behaviors are caused by perception, beliefs. They're represented by specific configurations of photons of light, the energy we're talking about. Change the field, you change the belief. Change the belief and you change the behavior and thought pattern. So it's all about how do you isolate the belief you want to change, how do you get the subconscious mind to do the work for you instead of making it so hard trying to do it consciously. And we're going to be doing just that. Myth number 3, you need to consciously know what caused the problem in order to change it. Well, if I don't know what caused it, how can I change it? That's the mantra of mainstream psychotherapy, because they're having to change things by figuring out what it was, telling you what happened, giving you this powerful insight, and then making a huge assumption that insight is a sufficient condition to change. Now that's what really turned me around after I got out of graduate school, because I was sitting down doing that really well with people. We got real clear about why they were screwed up. They knew, I knew, but they were still screwed up. Unsatisfactory, unacceptable. You had to figure out a way to change that. How do you get to the behavior? Not just through this ton of awareness. I don't know about you, I'm up to my eyeballs in insights. Spiritual insights, psychological insights, all these insights, and then you got to wonder, well, why does my life look like all these wonderful insights I've got? I mean, true. So the reason is we have been talking to the wrong part of the mind most of the time. So becoming consciously aware of the source of the problem is seldom necessary to change most beliefs or behaviors when you're dealing with the subconscious mind. That's where the power is. That's where the juice is. That's where the storage unit is for your beliefs. It's not about willpower. Okay. Let me give you an overview of the process that I use, and this is basically the components of it. Think of it that way. To get the job done in terms of speeding up change. And literally it can happen in just a few minutes. Establishing communication with the subconscious is step 1. I was never taught that in graduate school. In fact, I don't think they mention the subconscious except talking about Freud. And Freud, I mean, if you listen to Freud, the subconscious is a place nobody wants to go. I mean, talk about a deep, dark abyss of, repressed sexual desire. And you know the term Freudian slip? You know what that is? That's when you say one thing but you mean your mother? Yeah. That'd be a Freudian slip. Okay. So nobody wants to go there because they've made it a horrible place to go. But the fact is, it's no more horrible than your hard drive. You go to your hard drive all the time. If you open your computer and you get documents out of there and stuff, that's energy. So we're going to be communicating with the hard drive here. You're going to pretest a desired belief statement. That's a very important thing to find out if your subconscious believes it or not. Like Juliana was very kind to come up here and give her attention to this process, and I had her say something that was pretty non-threatening, my name is Juliana. But what if I had said something like, had her say something like, I love myself unconditionally, or I trust that I am a wonderful person, or anything that she would desire to be and to know about herself. Then all of a sudden the rubber meets the road. Now you're finding out from your subconscious mind, do you agree with that statement or do you not? You may have done tons of therapy, you may have been saying affirmations and meditated for 25 years, and I tell you, surprise, surprise, you'll say something you think is true and you do believe it consciously, but your subconscious mind never got the message. And that's the part that really needs to get it in order to have behavioral change last. That's why so much change tends to be temporary and made out of lots of willpower. All right, so we've got pretest the statement, get permission and commitment to change the belief using a psyche balance. The balance processes that I use, I call them balances because essentially what they do is they create a balanced identification or perception of the left and right hemisphere of the brain at the same time for the new belief. And by doing that, using this whole brain integration process stuff, you can reduce the resistance to internalizing a new belief very quickly without all that effort and struggle. And the permission and commitment thing is really important. I've noticed in conferences I've attended for energy psychology as an example, many of the processes make huge assumptions that if you have something that looks like it needs to be fixed, it actually represents something that's broken. I don't know about you, but a lot of times whatever you call broken is a messenger. That message is there to that pain or difficulty or whatever you call dysfunction is there to teach you something, and you kill the messenger. So I found that it's much wiser to find out from the subconscious. It's even a good idea to do what you're talking about consciously before you do it. It saves you a lot of grief later on, and you don't have to get the proverbial 2x4 returning to get your attention because you managed to get a symptom to go away. This isn't about treating symptoms. It's about the cause of the symptoms. And then we'll do a balance, which is the process for change using whole brain integration of some kind or another, different varieties of that. We'll post-test the belief statement because it gives you a physical muscle response that's going to be different than in the beginning. So you have an objective way to measure a subjective change. You don't just say, well, how do you feel? And, well, fine, you look good. All right, see you next week. It's not that. You know before you leave the interaction whether that belief resides in your subconscious or not. So there's a way to know it for sure. And then celebrate the change, and that's my favorite part. So we'll be doing that. Okay. So, let's see. I want you to take a look at some of these messages. What I did was I distilled some of the key messages that over the years of doing psychotherapy, I found that many people internalize from their childhood. You'll never amount to anything. You're worthless. You're not smart enough. No matter how hard you try, it's never good enough. Money's hard to come by and hard to keep. You don't deserve to succeed. No one will ever love you. And Bruce's favorite, you're going to get cancer because it's genetic. This one at the bottom, of course, you can make generic, which is you're going to get whatever disease you're predisposed to because it's going to get passed along in your family. So it doesn't. I'm just putting it out there to let you know that it doesn't matter what disease you put in this category of cancer. It's the same notion that I'm helpless and the situation is hopeless. I'm just going to get what I'm getting passed along. So these may be some of the messages that you got. And the question is, what if you could change them? What if you could have anything on this list? What if anything on this list could be true for you? What I'm going to ask next is, I'm going to ask somebody else to come back up to the stage, and I'm going to facilitate a process, first of all, to discover whether the belief that seems desirable to you is currently true in your subconscious, and if it isn't, then I'm going to facilitate a process to make it so. It'll take just a few minutes to do that. And so what I'd like you to do is just read down this list, and if one of these beliefs calls to you and just says, boy, I want that. It may not be true right now, I'm not sure, but I'd be willing to come up here to make sure. Would you have one? Okay. Come on up. Yeah.
If I get this one, I might actually be able to finish my PhD.
And which is that?
I deserve happiness and success in my life.
I deserve happiness and success. And your name is?
Karen.
Karen. Okay, Karen, I'm going to have you come over here, please. Like about so. And I'm going to have you put your arm out. We're going to do a little muscle testing together. Can I have you turn this way just a bit? Thank you. With your chin parallel to the ground, your eyes focused down and open. I'm going to press down on your arm. I want you to be strong if you can. You ready?
Okay.
Be strong. Okay. So we're going to do what we did initially to establish communication, because I haven't gotten a weak signal, so I don't know what that's like in Karen's system. So I want you to say out loud, my name is Karen.
My name is Karen.
Be strong, Karen. Good. Say, my name is Frank. Be a guy named Frank.
My name is Frank.
Strong, Frank. Okay, can you feel a difference in that? Okay, I'm not pressing hard. I don't want to press hard. I'm not trying to make this dramatic. I'm just trying to press hard enough that she can tell when the muscle locks in place and when it unlocks. So we're getting a very clear signal here. Just for fun, I want you to do in your mind silently, repeat the word yes. Hear that over and over in your head. And be strong as I press. Okay, repeat the word no over and over. And again, be strong as I press. Good, you feel the difference?
Yeah.
Big difference. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to make this a little juicier now. We're going to have Karen actually say her desired statement out loud. We're going to test it against what the subconscious mind currently has residing in there as a set of beliefs and see if she has any beliefs that support that. She may actually not believe it consciously. It's possible she could already believe it subconsciously, and we don't know that until we test. So if you'll put your arm out again. I'm going to have you say your statement out loud, which is, I deserve happiness and success in my life. Look down and say that like you mean it.
Okay. I deserve happiness and success in my life.
And be real strong. Oh, nice try. Please, God, make it work. That's about wanting it with all your heart and soul, but not having the program to support it. And that's what I mean. You say, oh, geez, I tried it, and I want that, and I'm really desirous, and oh, I'm all lined up, and your subconscious says, sorry, no software for that one. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to demonstrate a change process, and this is different than teaching it, so please forgive me in terms of not being able to have the time to explain each little detail. That's why it's a 2-day workshop. I can't make that into this hour or so that we have together. But I'm going to facilitate this with her by going through the protocol, generic protocol I showed you, and we'll see what happens. So if you put your arm out for a minute, please.
Okay.
First of all, we're going to get permission and commitment. We've already tested the statement. We know that you're weak to the statement. The goal is to get her to be strong to the statement. Right now she tests weak, although she's really wanting to be strong. And I can understand that. All right, so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You don't have to repeat any of this out loud. Just listen. And then I'm going to muscle test for yes and no responses and so on, okay?
Okay.
All right, it's safe and appropriate for Karen to balance for this goal now. So be strong, Karen. Good. We get a nice, strong response indicating yes. All parts of the system are ready, willing, and able to balance for this goal using a new direction balance. So be strong if you can. Good. All right, her subconscious mind just agreed to one of the several psyche patterns. You might be asking yourself, how could she know what that is? Well, I'm not asking her conscious mind. Turns out I'm asking her subconscious mind. And the real magic of this is lots of information is shared subconsciously that you're not aware of at all. Every time you walk into a room, especially if you're as close as I am to her right now, much information at the 4 billion bit processing level is being exchanged between us. So if I know what a new direction balance is, turns out I do, I muscle test her and her subconscious mind can actually give me a response to that because it can access my hard drive. It's very interesting about this stuff because I did it in foreign languages just to prove this to myself. What a trip. I got muscle tested in Mandarin Chinese, and my subconscious mind knew what this person was saying. All the muscle responses were correct for the questions that she was asking. So it gets really interesting in a hurry. All right, so here we go. We've gotten as far as doing the actual change process. I'm going to require a chair for this, so if you'll hold on right here, I'm going to grab one. Or I'm not. Oh, here it is. Thank you. All right, I'm going to put you right there, and you can sit down in that chair. Okay? So what we're going to do next is we're going to utilize some of this left-right brain integration technology I spoke about. We're going to set up a system so that Karen's mind can maximize her perception, left and right brain at the same time, while she internalizes this new belief. This is different than just saying affirmations, and I'll explain a little bit about that while she's going through the process. To determine the best way for her to achieve this left-right brain integration, we're going to use her physical body because it's an electrical system. If she crosses her ankle one over the other, her electrical field actually changes. I don't know if you know that, but when you cross your ankles or your legs, you're really changing the field in your entire body. Same with your wrists. Any place you can cross the midline of your body makes a different electrical circuit, just like a circuit board. So watch what happens. If you put your arm out like so, please, and cross one ankle over the other, it doesn't matter which one, looking down again with your eyes, I'm going to press down, you see if you can be strong. Okay, switch your ankles the opposite way. Let's see if it makes any difference when I test. And be strong now. Ooh, you see the difference? Go back this other way. Apparently there is a clear preference here. Be strong. She's real strong when she crosses right ankle over left. And remember, this is all in relationship to this goal. This is not a general thing now. We're into a belief change piece. That's the target. And her subconscious mind is telling us, hey, this is the way I need to be configured optimally to get this belief to be true. So while your ankles are in the position that causes the strength, I want you to do the following with your wrist. Put one on top of the other straight out in front of you like so. I'm going to press down on both of them, and I want you to be strong if you can. Strong now. Okay, switch them the other way. Let's see if it makes any difference. Be strong now. You tell me which one feels stronger. Go back to the other way. Be strong now. Okay, and back the other way. Be strong. Yeah, this way does, doesn't it? Like so. Yeah. We're getting a clearer signal. I just had to test a couple times because the difference is fairly subtle. So what you do with your hands now is just go ahead and interlace them like this. You can rest them in your lap. Here's what I want you to do. And then I'm going to have a little chat with the group while you're doing it. I'm going to have you close your eyes in a little while, and I'm going to have you be able to silently just repeat the statement. I'll give it to you, and then you're just going to repeat it gently over and over in your mind. And what I want you to do is I want you to actually invite any resistance to the idea, any other ideas like your statement is, I deserve happiness and success in my life. If you've got any other voices in there that say, no, you don't, you never did, you never will, all that stuff, rather than try to push them away or make them go away, I actually want you to invite them in. Say, okay, come on, because it's an educational process. You're going to be saying this statement to this resistance until the resistance just disappears. So until you feel either a mental, emotional, or physical change, keep your eyes closed and keep saying the statement to yourself. When you feel that shift, I want you to open your eyes and we'll do the next part of the process.
Okay.
Deal? Mm-hmm. And I'll amuse everybody out here while you do this.
Okay.
So I want you to close your eyes, silently begin to say the statement, I deserve happiness and success in my life. And while Karen is doing that, I wanted to make a couple of comments about what's going on. we've configured her body, not according to my guess or my judgment about what she needs, but her subconscious mind, which knows how that belief is blocked. It knows exactly what software needs to be rewritten to make it so, and it's in the process of doing so right now. It's different than meditation, because most meditation is single-focused and all other ideas must go away. You notice the instruction I gave her wasn't to do that. It was to say the statement and invite these other ideas in. It's not prayer, because you're not really asking for intercession in some way. Come, please help me. It's not that kind of thing. You're just affirming this belief over and over. It's not visualization. It's not positive thinking. It's simply affirming a statement to be true, educating the parts that are in resistance, and doing it through the filters of whole brain integration. While in this posture, she can't think of the downside of this the way she used to. Left and right brain now are working simultaneously, and they're perceiving this goal in a brand new way that she hasn't been able to every time she's thought about it in a normal sitting posture or just in her normal life. So it's really interrupting the cycle of over-identifying with the left or the right hemisphere of the brain, which kept her stuck. As soon as this comes into a whole brain integrated perception, the belief's hers, and we'll test it out. Okay? So you keep at it until you can feel something change, and then you just let me know, and I'll keep talking to all these people about this. So it's usually this process, I'd say on average, takes about 2 to 5 minutes for most beliefs to change. Small price to pay for something you've had all your life that's been arresting your life and keeping it from being in that ecstasy, the picture that we saw, and really promoting a lot more of the protection and the scream energy to your life. So it can shift, it does shift, and it's not about me doing something, it's about her. In fact, all of Psyche is really about very little about the facilitator and a whole bunch about the innate wisdom and the divinity within each of us. It's activating that and moving it into a specific area of intention and giving the tools to the subconscious mind to do the job that it is capable of doing with the proper instruction for doing it. Sometimes when the change is taking place, this is another interesting aspect of this process, is that it's not particularly visual. You don't have to visualize anything. If you're not a good visualizer, you don't have to make a picture in your head to make things come true. If you tend to be more auditory, you make sounds in your head, you talk to yourself in your head, you'll go there. However the belief is wired in that needs to be changed, that's what she's going to get internally. So sometimes you'll get pictures, sometimes you'll get sounds, sometimes it's just your body, you're feeling. You'll feel the body change, you'll feel the muscles tense and then release. Happens differently for each person and different with each belief. Okay, she seems to think something's going on here, so we'll check this out. So unhook your ankles and your wrists, unhook these guys. Put your fingertips together like so.
All right.
Just hold them there. This is equivalent to the save command. If you think about what she was just doing in a computer metaphor, she was editing the documents that kept her from believing she deserves this life that's going to work. Then we're saving this to the hard drive. We're making it a permanent document in her subconscious mind so that it won't just go away. It's the same thing as you always save your work before you turn your computer off, so it's there when you get it next time. Same idea, so you can let go of that. Put your arm out to your side. I'm just going to test to see where we are with the process right now. This is a sort of intermediate deal. So just listen. This process is complete, so be strong if you can. Good. I get a nice strong response. You can stand back up, please. I'm going to remove the chair here. We're at a place where her subconscious just reported to me, I've had enough of that. I got it. Thank you. So we're going to verify and see if that's really true. So I'm going to press a lot harder than I've been pressing just to make sure if this is true, that there's no doubt it is. I want you to say out loud, I deserve happiness and success in my life. Looking down, say it like you mean it.
I deserve happiness and success in my life.
And be strong. Yeah. If I let go, she brings like a springboard. Nice going.
Thank you.
Good for you. So hang in with her just a minute. So I'm just wondering if, Karen, would you mind saying a little bit about what was going on while you were sitting down there?
Well, I started saying all the things, no, you don't, everybody's going to be jealous of you, you have to feel guilty. And then all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute. God wants everybody to be happy and successful in their life. And if God wants everybody to be happy and successful in their life, God wants you to be happy and successful in your life.
Bingo.
And when I went through that process, it just, it was very logically based. If this, then that,
So did you tend to hear, was that a conversation going on in your head more than anything else?
But then as soon as I realized that, I felt like just kind of like a lifting, like a happiness type of thing.
Well, I think that I deserve happiness and success. Might have something to do with the feeling getting to come in for a change. She She went from the scream to the ecstasy pretty quickly right there. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank
Enjoy the
you.
change.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for volunteering. Okay. So, what'd that take? Maybe 5 minutes while I was trying to keep you distracted, so she had some, consider the circumstances. This is the worst possible place, on a stage with people in an audience doing belief change work, and it works anyway. Imagine if you had the privacy of your own home and one other person to work with and you didn't have an audience the whole time. How simple the things are. It's just been remarkable, my experience in the change work. When this work came in, and I say came in because I didn't sit down and analytically develop Psyche. It really was one of those born out of a moment of terrible frustration with graduate school training and other things I tried. All of a sudden, entire patterns of change were just downloaded in my computer. I went in my house literally and typed the information into a computer and said, okay, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. And then I just read off the sheets and learned to work that way. It was very interesting. And this was 14 years ago. So I was very skeptical, didn't believe in muscle testing because I'd never experienced it, didn't believe in these patterns until I could experience them myself. And when I saw the really miraculous changes that were taking place in short periods of time, physically, emotionally, spiritually for people, I finally just said, okay, thank you, and I'll do it. So it's you find your path and you stay with it because it works. And it's my joy to get to share this information with you. It's like Bruce and I bond because he's bumping the envelope of biology. I'm doing the same with psychology. We've been looking in the wrong place for the changes for a lot of years, and it's time to wake up and do it completely differently. So thank you for your kind attention, and if you have an interest in learning more about the work, Doug's going to tell you about our workshops on the weekend. Are there any questions before I close? Anything that pressing and you need to know other than you need to go? Okay. One last thought. Okay.
Is this something you can teach yourself to do?
Can you do it with yourself? Is that what you're saying?
Can you do this all by yourself?
Yeah, you can. There are methods of self-testing that are possible, and they have their limitations. So what's really good about it is if you have a friend or anybody, it doesn't even matter that they even know the work, and if they don't come to the workshop, that doesn't matter. What matters is one of you came. Then you'll know the work, and all you need to do is take 2 minutes and teach somebody muscle testing. If somebody else is pressing on your arm, it's just more objective than if you're doing the whole loop yourself. At least that's what I would recommend. A lot of people do it, and I honor that, but I would rather have somebody else testing me than me testing myself, especially when the issues are really where the rubber meets the road. Okay? All right, so final thought. Remember that your beliefs determine the limits of what you can achieve. As Henry Ford put it, if you believe you can, or if you believe you can't, you're right. Good night.